Tonight, we're exploring the deep lore of the wizarding world, the magic system itself, the legendary objects, the great institutions, and the lingering mysteries that stretch far beyond any single character's story. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now, back to the video. Rain moves in soft sheets across the towers of a castle that has stood for nearly 1,000 years, its windows glowing amber against a slate-gray sky, and somewhere beneath its foundations, magic itself hums quietly through stone that was never simply stone at all. This is a world built not from steel and circuitry, but from will and wonder. A world where a 14-inch length of vine wood can carry a person's whole heart inside it, where a bank vault might be guarded by a dragon older than the city above it, where a prison sits alone on a rock in the North Sea, holding memories instead of walls. Before there was Harry Potter, before there was Voldemort, before there were Horcruxes or founders or houses sorted by hat, there was simply magic, ancient and patient, waiting to be understood. Tonight, we begin not with a single wizard's journey, but with the fabric underneath every journey ever told in this world, the invisible current that runs through wand and stone and spell alike. That story begins in Chapter 1, the nature of magic itself. To understand any of the tales that unfold across the wizarding world, one must first understand the thing beneath them all, the quiet current that runs under every spell, every potion, every enchanted stairway and singing portrait. Magic itself. Not the fireworks of a duel, not the flash of a transfiguration, but the raw and formless force that makes all of it possible in the first place. It is easy, when caught up in stories of famous wizards and dark towers, to forget that magic is not simply a tool people pick up and set down. It is closer to a sense, an inborn capacity, something that lives in the body the way sight or hearing does, except that only some are born able to use it at all. Wizards and witches often describe magic as something felt rather than seen, a warmth or a pressure that gathers just beneath the skin, especially in moments of great feeling. Long before a child ever holds a wand, that magic tends to announce itself in small, uncontrolled bursts, an accidental spark of temper that shatters a window, a sudden vanishing act when a frightened toddler wishes very hard to be somewhere else, hair that changes color to match a mood. These flashes are not spells in the technical sense. Nobody has taught the child an incantation or a wand movement. What happens instead is that raw magical energy, unshaped and unaimed, responds directly to emotion, slipping out through the will the way steam slips through a cracked kettle. This is why so many stories of young witches and wizards begin with a strange, unexplained incident. A garden gnome sent flying, a sibling's hair turned an alarming shade of blue, a bully finding himself several feet off the ground with no clear cause. It is magic in its most primal form, present before language, before training, before any classroom has ever explained what a wand core is or how to hold one properly. Where this ability comes from has puzzled the wizarding world for centuries, and it remains, even among the most learned scholars of magical theory, not fully settled. It is broadly understood that magical ability is at least partly hereditary, passed down through families the way other traits are passed down, which is why certain households, the kind that keep tapestries tracing their lineage back many generations, produce witch and wizard after witch and wizard with almost no exception. Yet heredity alone cannot explain everything, because magic also appears, unbidden and unexplained, in children born to two entirely non-magical parents, families with no known trace of magical blood in their history at all. These witches and wizards are commonly called Muggle-born, and their unexpected gift has long been treated by less enlightened corners of wizarding society as somehow lesser or suspicious, an attitude that has caused a great deal of needless pain and conflict over the years, though the magic itself makes no such distinctions. A spell cast by a Muggle-born witch works exactly as well as one cast by a member of an it seems, does not care much for pedigree, however much certain wizards have insisted otherwise. Just as curious is the reverse phenomenon, children born into magical families who show no magical ability whatsoever. Sometimes called squibs, it is a quiet sorrow in many wizarding households, a child raised among moving portraits and self-stirring cauldrons who simply cannot summon the spark that seems to come so easily to siblings and cousins. Argus Filch, the long-serving caretaker of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, is perhaps the best-known example. A man who spent his life among young witches and wizards without ever being able to join their world as one of them, relying instead on peculiar contraptions and closely guarded secrecy to compensate for what he lacked. His story, sad as it is, illustrates something important: that magic is not a matter of effort or desire. No amount of longing conjures it where it does not naturally exist, which suggests that whatever determines magical ability operates on a level closer to biology than to character or worthiness. Magical theorists have proposed that every witch and wizard carries within them a kind of internal reservoir, sometimes described as a magical core, from which all spellwork draws its power. This is why exhausting bouts of magic, extended dueling, complex transfiguration, or particularly demanding healing work tend to leave a witch or wizard feeling drained in a way that closely resembles ordinary physical tiredness. The core is thought to replenish with rest, much as muscles recover after strain, and it is also thought to grow in capacity as a witch or wizard matures and trains, which is part of why very young children are rarely capable of the kind of sustained, precise magic that a trained adult can perform. A first-year student at Hogwarts might manage a respectable levitation charm after weeks of practice, while a fully qualified witch might produce the same effect instantly and without conscious thought, the spell having become almost a reflex. This inner reservoir also explains why magical exhaustion is treated seriously by healers, and why witches and wizards who overextend themselves, drawing on more power than their bodies can comfortably provide, sometimes fall into a kind of deep, magically induced sleep or illness that ordinary rest alone cannot cure. It is thought that magic and the body are so closely bound together that abusing one inevitably strains the other, a reminder that even in a world of flying broomsticks and talking portraits, there are limits that must be respected. Sensing magic, too, seems to be its own peculiar skill. Experienced witches and wizards often speak of being able to feel the presence of strong magic in a room before they consciously notice its source, a kind of prickling awareness, the way a person might sense a storm gathering before the first raindrop falls. Certain magical objects hum with this same quality, radiating power that trained witches and wizards can detect even through wrapping or disguise, which is one reason curse breakers and magical historians rely as much on instinct as on instruments when examining unfamiliar artifacts. Some magical creatures, too, are remarkably sensitive to this ambient energy, reacting to powerful magic long before any human companion notices a thing, which has made them invaluable in situations where subtlety and quiet detection matter more than force. It is worth pausing here to consider how mysterious this all still is, even to those who have devoted entire careers to studying it. The Ministry of Magic classifies spells, catalogs creatures, and regulates magical trade with impressive bureaucratic thoroughness. Yet, the fundamental question of what magic actually is, where it resides, and why it favors some and passes over others, remains only partly answered. Perhaps that mystery is part of what makes it feel so alive. A force that could be fully measured and explained might lose some of its wonder, and wonder, after all, is very much at the heart of this world. From the moment a child's stray thought sends a book flying across a room, to the moment that same child, years later, stands trembling with anticipation in a narrow, dusty shop on a crooked street, waiting to discover which of thousands of slender wooden instruments might finally answer the magic already living inside them. That story, the story of how untrained power becomes shaped and guided, of how a witch or wizard first learns to hold and direct the very force we have been describing, begins the moment such a child walks through a certain door on Diagon Alley, and it is there that we now turn to uncover the strange and ancient tradition of Wandlore itself. In Chapter 2, The Wand Chooses the Wizard. There is a particular kind of shop on Diagon Alley that every witch and wizard remembers for the rest of their life. A narrow, dimly lit place with a single, faded window display, and a sign so old the gold lettering has begun to flake away. Inside, the walls climb upward in towers of thin, narrow boxes stacked in a manner that seems to defy tidiness altogether. Thousands upon thousands of them reaching into shadow, each one containing a single wand waiting, in its own strange way, for the person it was always meant to find. This is Ollivander's, established in the year 1700, and for many generations it has been regarded as the finest wandmaker's shop in all of Britain, a place where the raw, untrained magic described in the previous chapter finally receives the instrument through which it can be properly focused, shaped, and expressed. It would be easy to assume that choosing a wand works something like choosing any other tool, that a witch or wizard simply selects whichever wand feels comfortable in the hand or produces the most impressive shower of sparks. Garrick Ollivander, the most famous of the family's long line of wandmakers, spent his career gently correcting this misunderstanding. He often explained to nervous young customers that the wand does not so much get chosen as it does the choosing itself, that the instrument responds to something deep within the person holding it, some quality of character or temperament that even the wizard in question might not yet fully understand about themselves. This is why fitting a customer for a wand at Ollivander's was never a quick transaction. He would take careful measurements, the length of an arm, the distance between the shoulders, sometimes even the space between the nostrils. Though, by his own admission, these measurements were mostly a formality, a way of buying time, while the true selection took place on an entirely different level, guided by instinct built over decades of practice. The process, as generations of Hogwarts students have discovered, tends to each one drawn from its box and placed briefly in an outstretched hand, only to be swiftly taken back the moment it becomes clear that no spark of recognition has passed between wood and witch. Sometimes dozens of wands are tested this way before the right one reveals itself, often through some small, startling sign, a rush of warm light from the wand's tip, a pleasant heat spreading through the fingers, or some other unmistakable feeling that Ollivander described as the wand and the witch or wizard recognizing one another. When Harry Potter first visited the shop as a young boy, he tried wand after wand with no success, until finally he was handed a wand made of holly, 11 inches long, containing a feather from a phoenix. The moment he took hold of it, he felt a warmth travel through his fingers, and a stream of red and gold sparks burst from the tip like a small firework. Ollivander regarded this with visible fascination, noting aloud how curious it was that the very phoenix which had provided that feather had provided only one other, which now resided in a very different wand indeed. One belonging to the wizard who had left Harry with the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. It was a striking reminder that Wandlore often carries meaning far beyond the simple mechanics of casting spells, weaving together fates in ways that even the most experienced wandmaker could only partly explain. The materials that go into a wand matter enormously, and wandmakers throughout history have experimented with an enormous range of woods and cores, each combination producing a slightly different character. The wood itself is thought to reflect something of the personality it suits best. Holly, for instance, has long been associated with protective qualities and is often drawn to those who face great personal challenges. Elderwood, rare and difficult to master, has a reputation for being temperamental, suited only to a wizard capable of overcoming its notoriously difficult nature. Vinewood tends to be drawn to those with hidden depths and a thirst for a greater purpose in life, while ash has traditionally been associated with unshakable loyalty and courage. These associations are not rigid laws so much as long-observed tendencies, patterns noticed across centuries of careful record-keeping by wand-making families, and Ollivander himself was always quick to remind visitors that ultimately no single element of a wand tells the whole story. It is the combination of wood, core, length, and flexibility, layered atop the character of the witch or wizard who carries it, that produces something truly unique. The core of a wand is, in many ways, its beating heart, the magical substance running through its center that allows it to channel and amplify a witch or wizard's power. 3 cores have long been favored above all others by the most skilled wand makers: phoenix feather, unicorn hair, and dragon heartstring, each with its own reputation. Phoenix feather cores are the rarest and, by Ollivander's own account, capable of producing the widest range of magic, though they are also considered temperamental and can take a very long time to bond fully with their owner, sometimes years. Unicorn hair, drawn only from creatures that permit it willingly, tends to produce the most consistent and faithful results. Wands that are difficult to turn toward darker purposes and loyal in a manner that mirrors the gentle nature of the unicorn itself. Though these wands are also thought to grieve, in their own fashion, if their original owner is lost, sometimes losing a measure of their power afterward. Dragon heartstring, on the other hand, tends to produce wands capable of the most powerful and flashy magic, quick to learn new spells, though also perhaps the quickest to change allegiance if won from a previous owner, a trait that has fascinated Wandlore scholars for centuries. This question of ownership and allegiance touches on one of the most mysterious aspects of the entire craft, the bond between a wand and its witch or wizard. Ollivander taught that a wand does not simply belong to whoever happens to be holding it. True mastery of a particular wand is something earned, often through the wand recognizing a change in its holder brought about by a significant act, sometimes one involving considerable daring or resolve. This is why a wand won or taken from another witch or wizard, rather than freely given, may not perform quite as well for its new holder until that bond has been properly established, and why an especially powerful or ancient wand is thought to shift its loyalty entirely under the right circumstances. It is a strange and almost living quality for an object crafted from wood and magical substance. And it speaks to something Ollivander believed deeply, that wands themselves possess a kind of dim, instinctive awareness, not intelligence in the way a person or creature might possess it, but a sensitivity nonetheless, an ability to sense character, resolve, and change. Most witches and wizards, once matched with their wand, remain devoted to that same instrument for the whole of their magical lives, and it becomes as personal and irreplaceable as a signature, something so entwined with its owner's identity that losing it can feel like losing a part of oneself. Yet, for all the elegance of Ollivander's craft, for all the careful matching of wood, core, and character that takes place inside that narrow shop on Diagon Alley, Wandlore is not the beginning nor the end of what magic can do. Long before Ollivander ever opened his doors, and even now among certain corners of the wizarding world, witches and wizards have practiced forms of magic that require no wand at all, ancient and instinctive methods that predate the neat categories of modern wand-making entirely. It is to these older, more elemental forms of spellcraft that we now turn our attention, uncovering the deep and often overlooked history of wandless and ancient magics in Chapter 3. The wand, it turned out, was never the true source. It was only a conduit, a narrow channel through which something far older and far larger chose to flow. And once that idea settled into the mind, the whole shape of wizarding history began to shift. Long before wand-makers like Ollivander and his forebears began fitting cores of phoenix feather and dragon heartstring into slivers of holly and yew, magic itself already moved through the world, unbothered by tools, unshaped by ceremony. We turn now to those older, more elemental forms of spellcraft, uncovering the deep and often overlooked history of wandless and ancient magics. And it is here, in this quieter chapter, that we begin to see how much of what wizards call power was never really about the wood in their hands at all. Picture, first, the youngest witches and wizards, long before their letters arrive, long before any wand has been chosen for them. A frightened child might make a vase fly across a room. Or, in one case gently recorded in the memory of the wizarding world, cause a sheet of glass at a reptile house to disappear entirely, freeing a boa constrictor with nothing more than a surge of feeling. This was the phenomenon touched upon earlier, the raw and unfiltered magic of childhood. Magic that answers to emotion rather than incantation. It reminds us that the core of a witch or wizard's power lives inside the body and the heart, not inside the wand. The wand comes later, as a kind of translator, a tool that allows that inner force to be aimed, measured, and controlled. Before the translator arrives, the magic still speaks, if a little wildly. As wizards grow older, most come to lean on their wands so completely that the deeper, wandless current beneath their power fades into the background, rarely called upon, rarely even remembered. Yet it never disappears. It waits. And in moments of extraordinary skill or extraordinary need, it rises again to the surface. Albus Dumbledore, regarded by many as the most accomplished wizard of his age, was known to conjure fire from nothing, to seal doors, to summon chairs, and to defend himself in the most desperate of duels without ever lifting a wand, his magic answering to will and intention alone. When he dueled Gellert Grindelwald in the year 1945, witnesses spoke of magic so old and so instinctive that it barely resembled the spellwork taught in classrooms. And in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, during the night Voldemort himself returned to that marble hall, Dumbledore's silent, wandless defenses held against a Dark Lord's fury, if only for a few precious moments, a reminder that, at the very highest levels of skill, the wand becomes almost a courtesy rather than a requirement. There is, too, a category of wandless magic so common that wizards often forget to marvel at it, and that is the magic of house elves. Elves like Dobby and Creature perform feats that would exhaust a fully trained witch or wizard reaching for a wand, and they do it with nothing but a snap of their long fingers. Dobby could apparate in and out of spaces sealed against wizarding magic, could hurl a grown wizard down a staircase with a flick of his hand, could conjure puddings to fall from the sky in a moment of mischief meant to keep a young wizard safely away from danger. Creature, bound by different loyalties, carried decades of grief and secrecy through Grimmauld Place, using nothing but the old elemental magic bred into his kind. Elvish magic is not a lesser cousin of wizarding spellwork. In many ways, it is older, deeper, tied more closely to bond and service and blood than to wand and word. It exists as living proof that magic was never dependent on the tools wizards later built around it. Among trained wizards, there is another tradition worth resting on for a moment, quieter than wandless casting, but closely related to it, and that is the art of the wordless spell. In advanced study of defense against the dark arts, students learn, often with great difficulty, to cast without speaking the incantation aloud. The wand remains in hand, but the voice falls silent, and the spell forms instead entirely within the mind. This skill matters most in real danger, where an enemy who hears a spell coming can prepare a shield or a countercurse in the space of a breath. Wizards like Severus Snape and Harry Potter were both known to master this art under pressure, casting protection or offense with nothing but a held breath and a sharpened will. Wordless magic sits at a kind of midpoint on this long spectrum, wand still present, but voice already stripped away, one small step closer to the pure, unspoken magic that needs no tool at all. Beyond the world of Hogwarts and its curriculum, older traditions persisted quietly among certain magical beings who never used wands in the first place. Goblins, keepers of Gringotts, and craftsmen of extraordinary skill, work a magic of their own, one bound tightly to metal and to the objects they forge. Magic so old and so particular that wizards have never fully replicated it, which is part of why goblin-made blades like Godric Gryffindor's sword resist ordinary damage and absorb only what strengthens them. Centaurs, too, read the movements of the stars and the turning of ages through a magic that predates any ministry classification, a magic tied to sky and hoof and season rather than to spellbook and wand. Merpeople sing enchantments beneath the water that no wanded wizard could ever properly reproduce above it. Each of these traditions whispers the same quiet truth. That magic did not begin with the wand and will not end with it either. The wand is simply the shape human wizards gave to something that was already ancient when the first wand maker was born. It is worth resting on this thought before we drift onward, that every spell cast with polished wood and a practiced flick is, underneath, the very same force that once let a frightened child shatter glass without meaning to. The same force that lets an elf vanish a wizard from harm's way. The same force that let a silent headmaster hold back the darkest wizard of his century with nothing but will. The ministry has always preferred neat categories, wandless magic here, ancient beings there, accidental outbursts filed away as childhood incidents. But the truth beneath all of it is far less tidy and far more wondrous, a single deep well of power that every witch, wizard, elf, and creature draws from in their own way. Even the earliest wand makers seem to understand this, in their own quiet fashion. The craft of matching wand to witch or wizard was never described as the creation of power, only its refinement, a shaping of something that already existed inside the person holding it. A wand chosen well simply listens more closely, responds more faithfully, and grows, over years of use, into something almost alive with familiarity. But take the wand away entirely, strand a powerful witch or wizard in a moment of true crisis, and the old current still answers, slower perhaps, rougher around the edges, yet undeniably present. It is easy to imagine wandless magic as some rare exception, a trick reserved for headmasters and desperate children, when in truth it may be closer to the rule, the deep unhurried river beneath the surface of everyday spellwork, the ancient inheritance every wanded incantation quietly borrows from. And yet, Of all the objects wizards have ever built to hold or channel or claim this old power, 3 stand apart from every wand ever carved. 3 objects wrapped not in craftsmanship, but in legend itself, said to have been fashioned not by any ordinary maker, but by death. Their story begins with 3 brothers upon a lonely road, and a bargain struck at twilight beside a river, and it will lead us through elderwood, and a stone that calls back the lost, and a cloak that was never meant to be removed. That story begins in Chapter 4, The Deathly Hallows Reconsidered, and there, at last, we will uncover what these 3 objects truly were, and what they were never meant to be. Old objects carry old stories, and few stories in the wizarding world have traveled so far, or been retold so often by candlelight, as the one waiting for us now, in Chapter 4, The Deathly Hallows Reconsidered. Let us set aside, for this hour, the war that made these 3 objects famous, and return them instead to where they began, as a tale told to children, a fable meant to teach rather than to frighten, the kind of story a parent might read aloud before blowing out the last candle of the night. The tale comes to us from a slim book of parchment pages, known as The Tales of Beetle the Bard, and among its stories, the one called The Tale of the 3 Brothers is the oldest and the strangest. It tells of 3 brothers traveling together at twilight along a lonely road until they came to a river too deep to wade and too violent to swim. Being gifted in the magical arts, the 3 brothers simply raised their wands and conjured a bridge across the treacherous water. Halfway across, they were stopped by a hooded figure. This was Death himself, and he was angry, for the river had been his, and generations of travelers had drowned in it. Yet these 3 had cheated him with nothing more than a flick of the wrist. Death was cunning, though, and he hid his fury behind a compliment. He told the brothers that each had earned a prize for such fine magic, and he invited them to name their reward. The eldest brother, a proud and combative man, asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence, a wand that would win every duel it was raised in. Death walked to an elder tree on the bank, fashioned a wand from one of its branches, and presented it to him. The second brother, an arrogant man who liked to mock Death, asked for the power to bring back those he had lost, so that he might humiliate Death itself. Death took a stone from the riverbed and gave it to him, telling him it held the power to call back the departed. The youngest brother was the humblest and the wisest of the 3, and he trusted Death least of all. He asked instead for a way to leave that place without being followed, so that Death could not track him. Death, most reluctant of all to give away this gift, removed his own cloak of invisibility and handed it over. Each brother, then, went his own way, and the story that follows is really 3 smaller stories about what it means to hold power that outmatches wisdom. The eldest brother traveled to a village and boasted of his unbeatable wand, and that very night, as he lay in a drunken sleep, another wizard crept in, stole the wand, and slit his throat for good measure. So Death claimed the first brother for his own. The second brother returned home and used his stone to call back the young woman he had once hoped to marry, who had died before her time. She appeared before him, but she was cold and faint and sorrowful, not truly returned to life, but merely a shadow of what had been, separated from him still by the same distance that separates the living from the dead. Driven mad with longing for something the stone could never truly give him, the second brother eventually took his own life so that he might join her properly. Death claimed the second brother as well. The youngest brother, meanwhile, lived a long and quiet life beneath his cloak, hidden from Death's searching, and only when he was old and ready did he remove it and greet Death as an old friend, walking off with him willingly as equals. And it is said that the man who first told this tale believed that whoever possessed all three of these objects, the wand, the stone, and the cloak, would become the master of death. Not because he could escape death forever, but because he would no longer fear it. That final phrase, master of death, has been argued over by scholars and dreamers alike for centuries, and it is worth resting on here in this hushed hour, because its meaning is gentler than it first sounds. It does not describe someone who conquers death or refuses to die. It describes someone who has made peace with the fact that they will. The youngest brother did not outwit death in the end. He simply stopped running. And that, the old story suggests, is the only mastery available to any of us. What makes this tale different from most fables is that its three objects appear to be real. Historical Wandlore traces the origin of what became known as the Elder Wand to a wizard named Antioch Peverell, believed by many scholars to be the eldest of the three brothers from the legend, or at least the man the legend was built around. From Antioch, the wand is recorded changing hands again and again across the centuries, and always by the same method, taken by force or by cunning from a defeated owner, since the wand's peculiar loyalty answers only to whoever has bested its previous master. It earned nicknames across that long history, the Death Stick among some circles, the Wand of Destiny among others, and its trail runs through the hands of duelists, collectors, and at least one continental European dark wizard of considerable and frightening skill during the 20th century, before vanishing again into legend, as such objects tend to do. The second brother's stone is believed to have passed down through the Peverell line as well, eventually set into a plain gold ring, worn for generations by the Gaunt family, descendants of the youngest Peverell line who fell into poverty and obscurity long before the ring's true nature was remembered by anyone outside old bedtime stories. Whatever its later history, the stone's power, when tested by those who half believed the old tale, matched Beetle's account far more closely than most expected. Calling back not living people, but faint echoes, tender and sorrowful, able to speak and to comfort, but never fully to return. Never warm, never quite of this world again. It was, in the end, a stone for saying goodbye, not a stone for undoing loss. The third gift, the cloak, is perhaps the quietest of the three, and in some ways the most remarkable, because true invisibility, the kind that does not fade, does not thin with age, and cannot be seen through by most detecting charms, is exceedingly rare in magic. Ordinary invisibility cloaks woven by even talented enchanters lose their power within a decade or two. The cloak said to have come from Death himself shows no such wear, and by long family tradition, it passed down through the descendants of that youngest, wisest brother, carried quietly from generation to generation of a family that valued privacy and modesty over spectacle. Fitting companions for an object that asks nothing more than to be left unnoticed. Three objects, then, born of one river crossing, one act of magical daring, and one old story about pride, longing, and humility. We have looked at them now as legend and as history, apart from any war fought over them, and what remains is really a question about which brother's choice we would make if a hooded stranger offered us the same three gifts on a darkened road. It is that very question of desire, of what the heart truly wants when given the chance to ask for anything at all, that carries us into the next chapter of our journey, where we will uncover the strange mirror that shows not gold or glory, but the deepest wish a person carries inside them. In Chapter 5, the Mirror of Erised and the Magic of Desire. That thread of hidden truth carries us now into Chapter 5, the Mirror of Erised and the Magic of Desire, where we turn from ancient wandless power towards something smaller, quieter, and in its own way just as old, a tall mirror standing in an unused chamber, its surface holding more than any glass has a right to hold. Picture a room deep within Hogwarts. Dust settled over the floor. Moonlight falling through a high window onto a mirror as tall as the ceiling, framed in gold, resting on 2 clawed feet. Around its top edge runs a line of engraved letters, strange at first glance, the kind of phrase that seems to belong to no language at all. Read slowly, backward. The letters resolve into something tender and plain. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. That single reverse sentence is the whole secret of the object, spoken so softly that a person has to slow down and turn the words over in their mind before the meaning arrives. Much like the mirror itself asks anyone who stands before it to slow down and look inward rather than outward. It was in his first year at Hogwarts that a young Harry Potter came upon this mirror by chance, wandering the castle late at night beneath a borrowed cloak. What he saw there was not his own tired reflection, but a crowd of faces gathered behind him, warm and familiar, though he had never known them waking. His mother stood with hand raised. His father stood beside her, and behind them stretched rows of relatives with his same untidy hair, his same shape of eyes. He returned to that mirror again and again in the nights that followed, drawn by a longing so old it lived in him before he had words for it, the simple wish to belong to a family he could see but never touch. It was Albus Dumbledore who found him there, and it was Dumbledore who explained, in his unhurried way, what the mirror actually was. He described how it showed each person who approached it something different, shaped entirely by what lay buried in that person's own heart, and he cautioned that the mirror gave neither knowledge nor truth of the world, only a reflection of longing. Men had wasted away in front of it, he said, entranced by what they saw, unable to tell anymore whether the images were real or even possible, forgetting to eat, forgetting to live, kept only by hope. He spoke, too, of his own experience before the glass, admitting that if he stood there, he would see himself holding a pair of thick, warm socks, a small and almost funny image that let him explain, gently, that even a wise and powerful wizard understood the danger of a mirror that shows exactly what the viewer wants most, and how easily wanting can become a kind of prison. Soon after that conversation, the mirror was moved away from Harry's reach, tucked into a new hiding place, a reminder that even the most beautiful magic can be too heavy for a young heart to carry alone. The mirror carries a second nature as well, one that goes far beyond comfort or longing. In that same year, it was pressed into use as a kind of lock and key, hiding the Sorcerer's Stone within itself. Only someone who wished to find the stone, without wishing to use it, would be shown their own pocket with the stone resting inside, and would find it had become real, delivered into their hand rather than merely seen. Anyone who wanted the stone for power or gain would see only their own reflection pretending to hold it, empty-handed in truth. In this way, the mirror judged not by cleverness or strength, but by the quality of a person's want, a piece of magic built entirely around the shape of desire itself. Hogwarts and the wider wizarding world hold other instruments built along that same idea, objects that peer past the ordinary surface of things and show what the eye alone cannot find. Among the most striking is the faux glass, a dark mirror kept by the retired Auror Alistair Moody, known to most as Mad Eye. Where an ordinary mirror shows the room behind the viewer, the faux glass shows something stranger, shapes of enemies, prowling and hazy, growing clearer the nearer they draw. Moody kept his prop in a corner of his office, a habit built from years of genuine danger, of watching his own back so long that even his walls had to help him watch it. A person glancing into that glass and seeing only cloudy, shifting shadows could take comfort in distance, and a person seeing sharp, near figures would know with a cold certainty no ordinary sense could offer. That danger had already arrived. Smaller and stranger still is the sneakoscope, a modest spinning top, often no larger than a fist, that a young wizard named Ronald Weasley once carried, a hand-me-down gift passed through his family. Made to detect untrustworthy people nearby, it would light up and begin to spin and whistle at the presence of deceit. Whether that deceit came from an enemy in disguise or, awkwardly, from someone perfectly ordinary behaving in a way the little device found suspicious. Cheaper models were known to react to almost anything, prone to false alarms. Yet even in their imperfection, they carried the same old promise as the Mirror of Erised and the faux glass, that magic could reach past the pleasant surface of a smile or a room and touch the truth sitting underneath it. And there is warmth to be found in this family of objects too, not only warning. A pair of small, matched mirrors, kept one each by the young James Potter and his closest friend Sirius Black during their school years, allowed each boy to speak to the other's reflected face from anywhere at all. A private thread strung between two hearts across any distance, useful for whispered plans and late-night mischief alike. Years later, one of that pair passed into Harry's hands as a gift from Sirius, wrapped and given without much explanation. A fragment of his father's youth returned to him in glass, though its true use would only become clear to him long after, in a moment of desperate need, when a single cracked shard proved enough to carry a voice and a face across miles of danger. Even broken and forgotten in the bottom of a trunk, such an object waits patiently to be remembered, much like a face waits behind silvered glass for someone lonely enough to come looking. Its magic dormant, but never truly gone, ready to wake the instant it is needed. There is something worth lingering on in how differently these objects behave depending on who stands before them. The Mirror of Erised answers to longing alone, indifferent to virtue or vice, showing a kind heart its family and a greedy heart its treasure with the same patient stillness. The faux glass and the sneakoscope answer, instead, to danger and dishonesty, tools built by wary hands for a wary world, useful precisely because they carry no judgment of their own, only a faithful signal of what already exists nearby. And the two-way mirrors answer to neither desire nor danger, but to friendship, to a bond strong enough to stretch itself thin across distance and years without breaking. Taken together, these devices suggest that wizarding magic has always understood glass and reflection as something more than decoration, a surface thin enough to press against and feel, just faintly, what lies on the other side. All these mirrors and gleaming little devices, the towering one in its gold frame and the modest one spinning on a bedside table, share a single quiet truth. Magic, in the world of Harry Potter, has always found ways to show what ordinary sight cannot: the ache of desire, the shadow of an enemy, the flicker of a lie, the far-off face of someone we love. But seeing is only the beginning. Some magic does not merely reveal what is hidden in the heart. It hides entire places, entire people, entire secrets from the world outright, folding them into parchment or silence or a single whispered name. That story, the story of ink that maps footsteps across a sleeping castle, of cloaks that erase a body from sight, and of a charm so absolute it can hide a whole family behind the walls of one person's trust, begins as we uncover Chapter 6, The Marauder's Map and the Magic of Secrets. The glass of that enchanted mirror has long since stopped rippling in memory, its surface returning to stillness. But the truest desires it once showed have a way of leading us toward other kinds of magic, the kind that hides rather than reveals, or perhaps hides in order to reveal at exactly the right moment. That thread carries us now into Chapter 6, The Marauder's Map and the Magic of Secrets, a chapter about parchment that remembers, about charms that fold a person out of sight, and about the quiet, patient magic of things meant never to be found unless they choose to be found. Picture a battered piece of parchment, blank and unremarkable to any eye that does not know its secret. Folded small, it might sit at the bottom of a trunk for years, mistaken for scrap. And yet within its fibers lives one of the most intricate pieces of enchantment ever produced by 4 schoolboys with too much time, too much talent, and too little regard for rules. This was the Marauder's map, born sometime in the 1970s within the halls of Hogwarts, the joint creation of James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. 4 friends who called themselves the Marauders and who wove into the map not only their genius, but their friendship, and, in one case, a shadow that would later fall across all of it. Each of the 4 had taken for himself a private name, a nickname born from what made him unusual, and the map carried these names etched into its very signature, so that anyone attempting to open it without knowing the proper words would find only insults returned to them in looping ink. James Potter was Prongs, a name drawn from the stag he became when he learned, through great effort and greater loyalty, to transform his body into an animal shape, an animagus, so that he might keep company with Remus during the difficult nights of the full moon. Sirius Black was Padfoot, styled after the great black dog he could become, bounding at Prongs' side through the grounds and beyond. Peter Pettigrew was Wormtail, the smallest of the 4 in his animagus form, a rat able to slip through gaps no boy could pass. And Remus Lupin was Moony, a name that spoke plainly of the condition he carried quietly for years, the transformation the moon forced upon him, and which his 3 friends chose not to fear but to accompany, learning transfiguration far beyond their years, simply so that he would not have to face those nights alone. Together the 4 of them mapped Hogwarts as no one before or since ever had, tracing every corridor, every staircase that shifted on its own schedule, every tapestry that concealed a passage, every one-eyed statue that opened onto a tunnel leading beyond the castle walls. Onto this foundation, they layered a deeper enchantment still, one that allowed the parchment to track the footsteps of every single person inside the castle, rendering them as small labeled dots that drifted unhurried across the paper, entering rooms, pausing in stairwells, wandering the grounds. In the hush of night, it was a spell of extraordinary subtlety, requiring the mapmakers to somehow attune the parchment to the presence of every living soul within those walls, a working of tracking magic bound permanently into ink and fiber. But the map would not simply open itself to any curious hand. It demanded a phrase, spoken with the wand tip pressed to its blank surface, an admission rather than a command, a phrase in which the speaker declared, solemnly, that they were up to no good. Only then would the ink bloom outward from a single point, spreading in fine lines across the page until the whole castle lay open in miniature. Corridors and towers and dungeons, all labeled in careful script, every occupant named and placed. And when its work was done, when its secrets needed folding away again, a second phrase closed it just as surely, a simple declaration that the mischief had been managed, at which the ink would draw back into itself, and the parchment would return to looking like nothing more than an old, empty sheet. For years, the map's history grows quiet, passing out of the hands of its makers as their lives scattered in directions none of them could have foreseen. It resurfaced eventually in the possession of Argus Filch, the caretaker, who confiscated it from students without ever understanding what he held, filing it away among countless other seized oddities. From that drawer, it was later lifted by Fred and George Weasley, twins with an instinct for finding exactly the sort of trouble the Marauders themselves would have approved of, and it was they who eventually placed it into the hands of Harry Potter. A gift that let him walk the same secret corridors his father once had. Though Harry would not learn the full truth of who Prongs and Padfoot and Moony and Wormtail really were until later, when the map's secrets and his own family's history began to overlap. The map belongs to one branch of a much larger tree of hiding magic, the branch concerned with revealing what is already there but unseen. There is another branch entirely devoted to concealment itself, and none of its spells run deeper than the Fidelius charm. This was magic of tremendous complexity, capable of taking a piece of knowledge, most often the location of a place, and burying it so completely that it could no longer be found by searching, or by asking, or even by looking directly at the place in question. The secret was hidden inside a single chosen person, called the Secret Keeper, and from the moment the charm was sealed, that secret existed nowhere else in the world except within that one person's protected knowledge. Even if 100 searchers stood in the exact spot, they would see only what the charm allowed them to see: empty space, an ordinary gap between houses, nothing worth a second glance. It was this charm that hid the Potter family at Godric's Hollow in the autumn of 1981. Their cottage folded from the sight of the world so long as their chosen secret keeper kept faith. They had trusted Peter Pettigrew with this duty, believing that his very smallness, his seeming unimportance, would make him the least likely target, the safest place to hide such a precious secret. It is a soft tragedy to sit with, and we can let it rest gently here, without dwelling on its sharper edges, simply noting how completely the charm depended on trust, and how that same completeness could be turned inside out. Long afterward, the same charm sheltered another home, the tall, narrow house at number 12, Grimmauld Place, kept hidden by Albus Dumbledore, acting as its secret keeper, its address unreadable and unspeakable to anyone not already told. Alongside such deep concealment lived smaller, gentler cousins of the same magic. The disillusionment charm, favored by Alistair Moody among others, painted its subject with the coloring and texture of whatever stood behind them. A slow trickle of transformation running down the body like a cool shell, cracking and reforming, leaving a person camouflaged as thoroughly as any chameleon against bark or stone. And older still than any spoken charm were the invisibility cloaks, rare woven fabrics under which a person simply vanished from sight altogether, needing no incantation at all. Only the draping of silvery cloth over the shoulders. Between these, other minor workings of masking and disguise rounded out this quiet family of magic, each one asking the same question in its own way. What does it mean to be seen, and who gets to decide when? The map had shown that some kinds of magic exist to reveal what is hidden across space, tracing footsteps through corridors and behind tapestries. But there is another kind of magic that concerns itself not with where a thing is hidden, but with when. And to uncover that stranger frontier, where hours can be folded and revisited the way a map folds a castle into a pocket, we turn now toward Chapter 7, Time and the Turner. The map had shown in the previous chapter that some kinds of magic exist to reveal what is hidden across space, tracing footsteps through corridors and behind tapestries. But there is another kind of magic, rarer and far more heavily guarded, that concerns itself not with where a person is, but with when. This is the magic of time, and it lives, for most witches and wizards, only as rumor and caution, tucked away in a single small department of the Ministry of Magic, watched over with more anxious care than almost anything else in the wizarding world. That story begins here, in Chapter 7, Time and the Turner. Time, in the world of Harry Potter, is treated as something closer to a living current than a fixed line. Wizards do not casually reshape it. Unlike the flashy duels and flying broomsticks that fill the imagination of most young witches and wizards, time magic is quiet, small, and dangerous in a way that has nothing to do with curses or creatures. Its central device, the object around which this entire branch of magic turns, is a modest-looking instrument known as the Time Turner. To look at, it resembles nothing more than a delicate golden hourglass, small enough to rest in the palm of a hand, hung from a fine chain so that it might be worn about the neck like a pendant. Sand drifts within its glass, and a ring of tiny markings circles its edge, and it gives no outward sign of the extraordinary power folded inside it. That unassuming appearance is, in its own way, part of the lesson the Time Turner teaches, which is that the most consequential magic often looks the least dramatic. The mechanics of the Time Turner are elegantly simple, at least in principle. A witch or wizard holding the device turns the hourglass over. Once for each hour, they wish to travel backward, and the world around them dissolves into a blur of retreating motion, colors and shapes rushing past in reverse, until they land gently in the same location, but at an earlier point in the same day. It does not carry a person forward, only back, and it does not carry them elsewhere, only to a version of the place they already occupy. This detail matters a great deal, because it means that a witch or wizard who uses a time turner does not vanish from the timeline they left. Instead, for a brief while, two versions of the same person exist simultaneously. One, living out the hours as they originally happened, the other, retracing those same hours from a hidden vantage point, careful not to be seen. It was Hermione Granger, in her third year at Hogwarts, who carried a time turner most famously, issued to her by Professor McGonagall, so that she might attend more classes than the ordinary school day could hold. Slipping back through the hours to sit through arithmancy and muggle studies and care of magical creatures, all in what looked, to her friends, like a single, unremarkable afternoon. It was a practical use, almost bureaucratic in nature, meant to solve a scheduling difficulty rather than to alter history. But that same device, in the hands of Hermione and Harry together, became the means by which two lives were saved in one long, quiet evening. The Hippogriff Buckbeak and Sirius Black, both rescued through a second pass across hours that had already been lived once. It remains one of the most beloved sequences in the entire story, not because it involves grand spellcasting, but because it shows time magic used with restraint, care, and a kind of patient tenderness. Two friends moving unseen through their own recent past to fix what had gone wrong, without unraveling anything else around them. That restraint is not incidental. It is, in fact, the entire philosophy behind how the wizarding world treats time magic. The Ministry of Magic keeps every time turner under lock and careful record, issuing them only rarely, and only for reasons considered serious enough to justify the risk. The Department of Mysteries, the hushed and secretive division of the ministry devoted to the deepest and least understood branches of magic, keeps a whole room lined with shelves of time turners, glinting softly under strange light alongside other instruments meant to study the nature of time itself. This is a telling detail because it places time magic in the same category as prophecy, thought, love, and death, forces the wizarding world acknowledges it does not fully understand and treats with correspondingly deep respect. The laws surrounding the use of a time turner are strict, precise, and largely unwritten in casual conversation because so few witches and wizards ever encounter one. But the rule repeated most often, murmured almost like folklore among those who do know of it, is elegantly simple. A witch or wizard must never be seen by their past or future self. doubling back across your own timeline is permitted, carefully. But crossing paths with the version of yourself living those same hours the first time around invites a danger the wizarding world speaks of only in hushed, cautious tones. It is said that such an encounter could unravel the fabric of what has already happened, and so time travelers move like careful shadows through their own recent past, ducking behind doors, waiting in alcoves, holding their breath until the moment is safe to continue. There is a deeper reason for this caution, one that Hermione herself explains with her usual precision. Terrible things have happened to witches and wizards who meddled with time. Some, it is said, accidentally killed their past or future selves. Others caused so much confusion and disruption that the Ministry was forced to intervene and erase the consequences entirely. These stories are rarely detailed in full, and they do not need to be, because the caution they inspire says everything. Time, in this world, is not a plaything. It bends, but only so far, and only in the hands of those who respect its limits. By the end of Harry's 5th year, the wizarding world's relationship with time magic changed in a way that reflects just how seriously it is regarded. During the confrontation at the Department of Mysteries, a shelf of time turners was shattered amid the chaos of battle, and rather than treating this as a simple loss of valuable equipment, the Ministry responded by all but abandoning the practice of issuing them altogether. It was judged, in the aftermath, that the risks of time travel outweighed its conveniences, and the golden hourglasses that had once hung so carefully around the necks of a select few students and officials were largely retired from use. This decision speaks to the broader lesson time magic offers across the entire saga, that power over time is not something to be handed out lightly, not even to the most trusted and capable witches and wizards, because the past, once lived, is a fragile thing, and the wizarding world has learned, through quiet incidents and old cautionary tales, to let most of it lie undisturbed. And yet, for all its danger, the time turner also carries something hopeful within its small golden frame. It suggests that even mistakes, even tragedies that seem finished and sealed, might sometimes be softened by care, patience, and a second careful pass through the same quiet hours. It is a rare kind of magic, one that asks not for power or speed, but for restraint, and it remains one of the gentlest examples in the whole story of magic being used not to conquer or dazzle, but simply to protect. From devices that bend the hours, the wandering mind might drift naturally toward another kind of small, quiet vessel found throughout the wizarding world. One brewed rather than turned, poured rather than worn, and no less capable of reshaping a life in an instant. Deep beneath the towers of Hogwarts, down winding stone stairs into cooler air that smells faintly of crushed herbs and simmering liquid, lies a tradition every bit as old and every bit as demanding as the magic of time itself. That story begins in Chapter 8, Potions and the Art of the Cauldron. Chapter 8, Potions and the Art of the Cauldron, begins in that same hush beneath the towers, where the stone stairs level out into a long, low chamber lit by hanging lanterns and the faint blue shimmer of dying flames under copper cauldrons. This is the domain of potion making, a craft that asks nothing of a wand and everything of the hands, the eyes, and the patience of the person standing over the fire, where charms and transfiguration reward a swift flick of the wrist and a clearly spoken incantation. Potion making rewards the opposite: stillness, exactness, and a willingness to wait. A stirring rod moved 7 times clockwise instead of 6 can ruin a brew as thoroughly as the wrong ingredient entirely. And the difference between a masterpiece and a poison can be as small as adding a root before the water reaches a boil rather than after. The dungeon classroom itself, in the years Harry Potter attended Hogwarts, sat below the main castle in a chamber cold enough that breath sometimes misted in the air. Its walls lined with shelves of pickled specimens floating in cloudy jars, its air thick with vapor that smelled of crushed beetle shells, wormwood, and something faintly sweet burning underneath. Long benches were arranged in 2s and 3s, each with a cauldron of hammered pewter, or, for the finest work, of gold or silver, and students hunched over their ingredients, slicing roots into precise slivers, crushing dried leaves to powder, and counting droplets of essence as though a single extra drop might undo an hour of careful work. For decades, the subject was taught by Severus Snape, a brewer whose skill was quietly recognized as extraordinary, even by those who found his manner cold. And after his departure from the classroom, the post passed to Horace Slughorn, a warmer and more indulgent teacher who nonetheless understood the craft with the same precision. Few potions capture the imagination quite like Polyjuice Potion, a brew so demanding that its preparation alone stretches across an entire month of careful tending. The recipe calls for ingredients that unsettle even seasoned brewers, among them laceing flies left to stew for exactly 21 days, leeches, fluxweed picked at a precise phase of the moon, knotgrass, and boomslang skin, all reduced slowly into a thick and mud-colored liquid. What makes the potion truly remarkable is its final requirement: a small physical piece of the person the drinker intends to become, a hair, a fingernail, a flake of skin, without which the transformation cannot occur at all. Once consumed alongside that fragment, the potion reshapes the drinker's body entirely into the likeness of its owner for the span of about 1 hour, voice and fingerprints included, though the effect unravels swiftly and without warning once the hour passes. It found its most memorable use when a group of second-year students brewed it in a forgotten bathroom to slip into the guise of others and follow a thread of suspicion through the castle, and its danger was made plain when the transformation went wrong for one of them, leaving her partly feline for several worrying weeks in the hospital wing. Just as celebrated, though for gentler reasons, is Felix Felicis, better known by its golden shimmer and its nickname, Liquid Luck. A single sip grants the drinker a stretch of charmed fortune, a sense that every choice made and every door opened leads toward exactly the right outcome, whether that means catching a train by seconds or stumbling into precisely the right conversation. Brewing it, however, is considered one of the most difficult undertakings in the entire discipline, requiring 6 months of exacting preparation and turning volatile and even dangerous if rushed or handled carelessly. Which is why so few witches and wizards ever attempt it, and why those who succeed treasure the result as something close to treasure itself. Because an unfair advantage of that magnitude could tip any contest, its use is strictly forbidden in organized competitions, from Quidditch matches to formal examinations, a rule enforced as much by tradition as by regulation. Not every potion in that dim classroom promised luck or disguise. Veritaserum, a colorless potion with no scent at all, compels whoever drinks it to speak only the truth. Its effects so powerful and so easily abused that the Ministry of Magic keeps its use under the tightest possible control, permitting it only under strict legal authorization. The draught of living death carries a different kind of weight entirely, a sleeping potion so profound that its drinker appears to have crossed fully into death, breath and heartbeat slowed beyond ordinary detection. A brew whose ingredients, among them wormwood and the root of asphodel, were once described by Severus Snape in a single unforgettable lesson that left an entire class of first years in silence. Perhaps the most quietly haunting of all potions is Amortentia, widely regarded as the most powerful love potion ever created. It shimmers with mother-of-pearl sheen and rises from the cauldron in coiling spirals of steam, and its scent famously differs for every person who leans toward it, drawing out whatever aroma that person finds most comforting or enchanting, whether that be fresh parchment, a particular flower, or the memory of a familiar kitchen. Yet for all its power, brewers and scholars alike are careful to note what amortentia cannot do. It cannot create real love, only an infatuation, so consuming it can be mistaken for the genuine thing. A distinction that matters enormously in a world where such potions might otherwise be misused to devastating effect. Not every potion exists for danger or delight. The Wolfsbane potion was developed for compassion, a complex brew that does not cure lycanthropy, but eases its burden considerably, allowing a werewolf to retain full human awareness and memory even through the agony of the monthly transformation. It requires masterful skill to prepare correctly and must be taken fresh in the days before the full moon. And for years it was brewed with quiet dedication by Severus Snape for Remus Lupin, a gesture that spoke, in its own understated way, of loyalty that outlasted old rivalries. Across the wizarding world, brewers of this caliber, the potion masters who spend lifetimes perfecting a single recipe, are regarded with the same reverence given to master craftsmen in any age. Their notes and annotations passed down like treasured heirlooms, their cauldrons polished by candlelight long after their students have gone to bed. Across the centuries, Hogwarts has produced brewers whose names are still spoken with a kind of hushed admiration long after their lessons ended. Individuals who treated the craft not as a chore to be endured, but as a quiet art form worthy of a lifetime's devotion. Some filled entire private libraries with annotated textbooks, their margins crowded with corrections and shortcuts discovered through years of trial, tiny handwritten notes that later proved more valuable than the printed instructions themselves. Others became famed for a single signature creation, a remedy or restorative so effective that it outlived its creator by generations, still brewed today exactly as it was first written down. The culture surrounding potion making has always prized this kind of patient devotion above flair or showmanship. For unlike the dramatic arc of a well-cast spell, a potion reveals its success or failure slowly, sometimes only after hours of simmering, and there is no shortcut through that waiting. It is a discipline that teaches humility as much as skill, reminding every student hunched over a cauldron that mastery is earned drop by careful drop, root by carefully sliced root, and that the deepest magic sometimes asks not for power, but for patience. And yet, even the most patient brewer, the most treasured golden potion, or the most closely guarded truth serum, finds its equal in another kind of vault entirely, one carved not from copper or pewter, but from solid stone deep beneath London, guarded not by careful measurement, but by creatures far older and far shrewder than any potion master. In Chapter 9, Gringotts and the Goblin Nation, we will uncover the story of that legendary bank, its dizzying architecture, the fierce and proud culture of the goblins who built and guarded, and the extraordinary magic that protects its vaults from anyone foolish enough to attempt what should not be attempted. The warmth of the dungeons faded slowly from the mind, the way candlelight fades when a door closes behind it, and the story now drifts upward and outward, away from simmering cauldrons and shelves of quietly labeled jars, toward a street of crooked shopfronts and cobbled stone, where at the very top of the lane a building of dazzling white marble rose higher than anything around it, and where the true subject of this chapter waited behind polished bronze doors. This is Chapter 9, Gringotts and the Goblin Nation. Diagon Alley curved and narrowed, and widened again as it climbed, past bookshops and apothecaries and windows filled with cauldrons of every size, until it opened onto a small square dominated entirely by that towering white building. Gringotts stood taller than its neighbors by many stories, its facade smooth and pale as bone, catching the light in a way that made it seem faintly luminous even under a gray sky. Uniformed doorkeepers stood at the entrance, and above the doors, carved into the stone, ran a verse warning any thief who dared enter that they would find, in place of treasure, a fate they had not earned. It was not decoration. It was a promise the bank had kept for longer than most wizarding families could trace their own lineage. Founded long before the days recorded in most modern textbooks, Gringotts had always belonged to the goblins, and it had always been run by them, without wizarding interference, a fact that said a great deal about the peculiar balance of power between the two peoples. To understand the bank, the listener must first understand something of the goblins themselves, a species entirely distinct from wizard kind, with their own language, their own history, and their own long, complicated relationship with the humans who shared their world. Goblins were short, clever, sharp-featured beings, with long fingers suited to fine work and dark, knowing eyes that missed very little. They were capable of a kind of magic entirely their own, wandless and old, passed down through generations of craftsmen rather than taught in any school. Wizarding law had long forbidden goblins from carrying wands, a restriction that many goblins regarded, not without reason, as one more mark of a world built to favor wizards over every other magical people. Centuries of uneven treatment had left a current of quiet resentment beneath the goblins' famous composure, a resentment that occasionally rose to the surface in what history remembers as the Goblin Rebellions, a series of armed uprisings across different eras in which goblins fought, sometimes fiercely and sometimes for years at a stretch against wizarding authority. These rebellions were not taught in most wizarding households as stories of heroism on either side. They were taught, when they were taught at all, as evidence of an old wound that had never fully closed. At the heart of that old tension sat a single question of philosophy, one that sounds simple and is not. Goblins believed that any object crafted by goblin hands remained, in the truest sense, the property of its maker, passed from wizard to wizard by purchase or by gift, but never truly owned outside the goblin nation itself. To a goblin, buying a sword or a suit of armor was closer to a long-term loan than a permanent transfer, and the idea that gold alone could sever an object from its true maker struck most goblins as both foolish and faintly insulting. Wizards, naturally, saw ownership rather differently, and this single disagreement, quiet as it seemed, had strained relations between the two peoples for centuries, coloring negotiations, trade, and trust alike. And yet, despite all of this, wizards trusted the goblins with the one thing they valued most, which was their gold, because nothing in the wizarding world was considered safer than a Gringotts vault, apart perhaps from the walls of Hogwarts itself. Beyond the marble entrance hall, where clerks in neat uniforms weighed jewels and counted coins behind long counters, the true scale of Gringotts revealed itself only to those who ventured further. Narrow cart tracks dropped away into darkness, winding down through a vast network of stone tunnels that plunged far beneath London, deeper than the deepest cellar, deeper than the river above. Visitors who rode those carts, rattling through the dark at astonishing speed, often felt their stomachs lurch as the track dipped and spiraled past countless vault doors, some small and plain, others vast and ancient, guarded by locks that had nothing to do with keys. The deepest and oldest vaults belonged to the oldest wizarding families, and the deepest of all were guarded by something far more dramatic than any lock. Chained near the lowest tunnels lived enormous vault dragons, pale and half-blind from years spent underground, trained through harsh and repeated conditioning to fear the sound of clanking metal, a sound the goblins used to drive them back from the doors before a cart approached. One such dragon guarded the vault belonging to the Lestrange family, coiled in darkness for so long that its scales had turned the color of chalk, its eyes clouded and pearlescent, its temperament unpredictable and dangerous to anyone who forgot, even briefly, what it was capable of. The security of Gringotts did not end with dragons. Certain high vaults were protected by enchantments so old that few outside the goblin nation understood them fully. Among the most famous was a waterfall of enchanted water known as the Thief's Downfall, positioned along one of the descending tunnels, which any goblin or authorized visitor could pass through safely, but which stripped away disguises, dispelled charms, and washed clean any spell of concealment from those who tried to sneak past it without permission. To be caught beneath the Thief's Downfall while carrying stolen goods or wearing a false face meant being revealed instantly, soaked and exposed, with nowhere left to hide. Individual vaults carried their own layered defenses as well. The Lestrange vault, in particular, was rumored to contain enchantments of a crueler design, curses that caused any object touched without permission to multiply endlessly, burying the thief beneath an ever-growing weight of duplicates, and other charms that scorched the skin of anyone who dared to lift what did not belong to them. These were not decorative threats. They were old, tested, goblin-made magic, refined over centuries specifically to punish those who underestimated the bank. That refinement was, in many ways, the goblin's greatest gift. For beyond banking and vault-keeping, the goblin nation was renowned across the wizarding world for craftsmanship of extraordinary quality. Goblin silver held enchantments that no wizarding smith could replicate, and goblin-forged blades were spoken of with a kind of hushed reverence. None more famous than the sword of Godric Gryffindor, a blade of ancient goblin make, its hilt set with rubies, its edge said to absorb only that which made it stronger, a property so rare that even those who studied magical smithing for a lifetime could not fully explain how the goblins had achieved it. It was this rare, dangerous, beautifully made world, half bank and half fortress, that made Gringotts feel less like a business and more like a small nation operating quietly beneath the streets of London, answerable to no ministry, bound by no wizarding law but its own. And it is that very distinction between a power built on gold and craftsmanship and a power built on paper and procedure that carries the story forward now. Deep beneath those marble halls, the tale is ready to rise back up toward daylight, leaving the vaults and the dragons and the goblin nation behind to uncover a very different kind of institution entirely, one built from parchment and policy rather than treasure. And that story begins in Chapter 10, The Ministry of Magic. Deep beneath the streets of London, where the marble halls of Gringotts had just been left behind, the story now rises toward the surface again, following a different kind of power entirely. One built not of vaults and dragons, but of parchment, procedure, and the quiet machinery of government. Somewhere between a red telephone box in an ordinary square and a discreet visitor's entrance built for those without wands of their own, the Ministry of Magic waits below London, a vast underground city of offices, courtrooms, and corridors that has governed the wizarding community of Britain for centuries. The ministry as it exists in the stories was not born overnight. Its roots trace back to the International Statute of Secrecy, agreed upon by wizards across the world in the late 1600s, when magical communities everywhere decided that concealment, not confrontation, would be the safest path forward. Before that great agreement, witches and wizards had lived more openly alongside non-magical people, and the memory of persecution, of trials and fires and suspicion had left a lasting caution in magical society. Out of that caution grew the need for structure, for someone to enforce secrecy, to settle disputes, to regulate the use of magic, so that the whole community would not be endangered by the carelessness or cruelty of a few. In Britain, that need eventually crystallized into the Ministry of Magic, led by a minister and organized into departments that, taken together, resemble something like a small and self-contained nation operating quietly beneath a much larger one. The ministry's atrium, with its dark wood floors and golden fountain and flickering fireplaces that serve as arrival points, gives only the smallest hint of the scale beneath it. Lifts descend past level after level, each one dedicated to a different department. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement handles crime and the enforcement of wizarding statutes, and within it operates the Auror Office, tasked with investigating dark magic and pursuing dangerous witches and wizards. Alongside offices for wizarding traps, magical law itself, and the improper use of magic office, which quietly investigates whenever underage or unauthorized spellwork is detected outside school walls. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures oversees everything from centaur liaison to the registration of dangerous beasts, while the Department of Magical Transportation manages the flu network, international portkeys, and the licensing of broomsticks. There is a Department of International Magical Cooperation, which handles treaties and the delicate diplomacy between separate wizarding nations, each with its own government and its own quiet arrangement with the Statute of Secrecy. There is a Department of Magical Games and Sports, overseeing everything from Quidditch to the Triwizard Tournament in the years such events take place. And there is the Department of Mysteries, tucked away on a lower level, staffed by the enigmatic unspeakables, who study subjects so profound and so little understood that even their names are rarely spoken aloud. Among them time, space, thought, and the nature of love itself. At the head of it all sits the Minister for Magic, an office that has passed through many hands across the centuries, from steady administrators to figures remembered less kindly by history. The minister answers, in theory, to the Wizengamot, the ancient court and legislative body of the wizarding world. And this is where the story becomes most interesting, because the Wizengamot represents something older and in some ways more powerful than the ministry itself. Its origins reach back to the founding era of magical Britain, when a council of wise witches and wizards first gathered to weigh matters of justice among their own kind. Over the centuries, it evolved into a body that is part court, part parliament, its members seated in tiered benches within a grand chamber, dressed in official plum-colored robes, empowered to try serious cases, to interpret and create magical law, and to check, however imperfectly, the authority of the minister. This is the delicate balance woven into the very structure of wizarding government, a balance between elected or appointed administrative power in the minister and the older, more aristocratic authority of the Wizengamot, many of whose seats have historically been held by members of old and influential magical families, passed down through generation after generation rather than earned fresh at the ballot box. It is a system that blends something like democracy with something closer to inherited privilege, and across the centuries, that blend has produced both moments of wisdom and moments of real vulnerability. When the Wizengamot is strong and independent, it serves as a genuine check against a minister who might otherwise act unchecked. When it grows too entangled with the ministry, when its independence is quietly eroded, history shows how easily that balance can tip, how quickly institutions built to protect a community can instead become instruments of fear. Particularly in darker years, when the machinery of government was turned toward suspicion and control rather than protection. Beyond the Wizengamot, And the ministry employs an enormous, quiet workforce. Clerks in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, healers on secondment from St. Mungo's, memory modifiers belonging to the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, and messengers in the form of paper airplanes that flit between offices carrying interdepartmental memos. A small piece of everyday magic so ordinary to those who work there that it barely draws a glance. The ministry also maintains the register of every witch and wizard born in Britain, tracks wand purchases through licensed wand makers, and issues the letters of admission that arrive each summer at the doorsteps of 11-year-olds across the country, connecting the vast machinery of government to the smallest and most personal moments in a young witch or wizard's life. For all its grandeur, though, the ministry has always been a human institution, built by people and therefore vulnerable to the same flaws that shape any government: favoritism, fear, the slow compromise of principle for convenience. Its history includes long stretches of steady, unremarkable governance, but also periods of genuine crisis, when the halls beneath London filled with a different kind of tension entirely, when the very fountains and statues in its atrium came to reflect, quite literally, the anxieties of the age, and when the ministry's own law enforcement proved insufficient, when someone needed to be removed entirely from wizarding society rather than merely punished within it, there was only one place such a sentence would lead: a fortress standing alone in the cold water far from any coastline, holding within its walls not just prisoners, but a philosophy of punishment that the wizarding world would spend generations slowly learning to question. That story continues now in Chapter 11, Azkaban and the Magic of Punishment. A fortress standing alone in the cold water, far from any coastline, holding within its walls not just prisoners, but a philosophy of punishment that the wizarding world would spend generations slowly learning to question. This was Azkaban, and to understand what it truly was, we have to travel back long before the Ministry of Magic ever claimed it. Back to a time when the island in the North Sea belonged to no one but the seabirds and the wind, and to a single dark wizard who chose it precisely because no one else wanted it. His name was Ekristis, and he lived in the 13th century, in an age when the boundary between the magical and non-magical worlds was far thinner and far more dangerous than it would later become. Ekristis built his fortress on that remote, storm-battered rock for the same reason a hermit chooses a cave at the top of a mountain, to be left alone with his work. But his work was cruel. He lured sailors and travelers to the island with promises of shelter, and once they arrived, he used them for dark experiments, testing the furthest edges of forbidden magic on people who had no way to call for help and no way to leave. The isolation that would later make Azkaban an effective prison was, in Ekristis' hands, simply a way to ensure that no scream would ever reach the mainland. It was during this same era that something else took root on that island, something that had nothing to do with Ekristis' own spellwork and everything to do with the nature of the place itself. Dementors began to gather there. No one summoned them, and no one quite understood why they came, though most historians believe they were drawn to the suffering Ekristis was causing, the way carrion birds are drawn to a battlefield. Dementors are among the strangest and most dreaded creatures in the wizarding world, tall, hooded, rot-scented things that seem to wear cloaks rather than possess bodies beneath them, and they feed not on flesh, but on happiness itself. Where a Dementor passes, warmth vanishes from a room, laughter becomes impossible to summon, and even the most treasured memory feels suddenly far away and colorless. They draw out contentment, hope, and joy, leaving despair in their place, and in the presence of enough of them, a person begins to relive their worst memories over and over, unable to reach for anything brighter. Eventually, word of Ekristis and his island reached those with the power to stop him, and he was killed. Though the exact details of his death have faded into legend rather than remaining as settled history. What lingered after him were the Dementors, who did not leave when their original host died. They stayed on the island as though it had become theirs by right of long occupation, and this created an unusual opportunity for the Ministry of Magic, which by then was searching for a way to deal with an old and difficult problem, namely, where to put the darkest and most dangerous witches and wizards once a court had passed judgment on them. The ministry's solution, formalized in the early 1700s, was to build its prison directly on that same island and to make an uneasy bargain with the creatures already living there. Rather than driving the Dementors out, the ministry allowed them to remain as the prison's guards, in exchange for what amounted to permission to feed on the prisoners housed within. It was, even by the standards of its own time, a controversial decision, but it was also remarkably effective in a narrow, grim sense. Azkaban did not need especially thick walls or elaborate locks, because stone and iron were never really what kept prisoners inside. The true security of the prison was the Dementors themselves, a presence so thoroughly draining of hope and will that even a powerful wizard, capable of extraordinary magic under ordinary circumstances, would find themselves unable to summon the concentration or the spirit needed to attempt an escape. Despair, in other words, became the lock. Life inside Azkaban was described by those who survived it as a kind of slow erasure. The cold of the island seeped into everything, and the Dementors' presence meant that prisoners were left, for the most part, alone with the very worst moments of their own lives, replayed endlessly, with no distraction and no comfort to interrupt the loop. For lesser crimes, this alone was considered punishment enough. But for the very worst offenses, the wizarding world reserved something even more severe, known as the Dementor's Kiss. In this act, a Dementor lowers its hood and draws out not a memory, but the soul itself, leaving the body alive, breathing, its heart still beating, but empty of the person who once inhabited it. Wizards spoke of the kiss in hushed, careful tones, because unlike death, which at least offered the possibility of being mourned and remembered as a whole person, the kiss left behind a kind of hollow shell, and many considered it a fate worse than dying. Over the centuries, Azkaban held its share of infamous names, and their stories tell us almost as much about the prison's flaws as about the crimes that sent people there. Bellatrix Lestrange was held within its walls for her role in torturing Aurors during the First Wizarding War, emerging years later no less devoted to her old causes, seemingly untouched in her convictions even after prolonged exposure to the Dementors' despair. Barty Crouch Jr. was likewise imprisoned there, before circumstances allowed him to slip free and resume a hidden double life for years afterward. And perhaps most tragically of all, Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban without ever receiving a proper trial. Accused of a betrayal and a mass killing he did not commit, and he endured 12 long years inside those walls, kept sane, by his own account, only by clinging to the truth of his innocence like a single fixed point in a storm, and later by learning he could transform into his animagus form, a great shelter from the Dementor's full effect. His case in particular became, for many in the wizarding world, an uncomfortable proof that the system could fail catastrophically, that a person could lose 12 years of an innocent life to a punishment so severe it barely mattered, in the end, whether the original verdict had been correct. It was stories like his, along with the ministry's later and ultimately disastrous decision to let the Dementors patrol beyond the island itself, guarding the school of Hogwarts and roaming freely during times of crisis, that began to shift public feeling. The alliance between the ministry and the Dementors, once seen as a practical convenience, started to look instead like a bargain made with something the wizarding world had never fully controlled to begin with. When the Dementors eventually abandoned their post at Azkaban and aligned themselves with darker forces during the Second Wizarding War, it confirmed what many had quietly suspected for years, that loyalty had never truly been part of the arrangement, only appetite. In the years that followed, a slow and searching conversation began among wizards and witches about whether punishment built on despair could ever really be called justice, or whether it was simply cruelty wearing the robes of law. That question would not be resolved quickly, and in many ways, it never fully has been. But the asking of it marked a turning point, a first uncertain step toward imagining a wizarding justice system less dependent on creatures that fed on the very will to live. From a place devoted entirely to punishment, our story now turns toward its opposite, a place devoted entirely to healing. In Chapter 12, St. Mungo's and the Healing Arts, we will uncover how the wizarding world built its great hospital, how it learned to mend broken bones with a swallow of potion and regrow bones overnight, and how, even there, healers have always known that some curses leave wounds that no medicine has ever been able to fully close. From punishment we turn now toward mercy, and from the cold stone of a fortress built to hold the guilty, we drift across the water and into the heart of London, toward a place built instead to hold the broken and mend them. This is Chapter 12, St. Mungo's and the Healing Arts. To an ordinary passerby hurrying along Purge and Dow's Limited, a shabby department store on a quiet London street, there was nothing to see. The mannequins in the window wore faded, old-fashioned dresses, and a small sign apologized that the shop was closed for refurbishment. But any witch or wizard in need of care needed only to approach the glass and murmur their trouble. A jinx that would not lift, a bite from something with too many teeth, a potion swallowed by mistake, and the mannequin would incline her head, and the glass would soften like water, and they would step through into St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries. It was a modest disguise for a vast and tender undertaking, hidden from Muggle eyes the way so much of that gentle world is hidden, tucked behind ordinary things, waiting patiently to be found by those who truly needed it. Inside, the hospital rose through 5 main floors, each one holding its own quiet specialty, and a listener drifting through its halls in imagination might move upward, floor by floor, the way one might climb a staircase in a dream. The first floor belonged to creature-induced injuries, where healers tended bites and stings and the slow poisons of magical beasts, treating werewolf bites and the deep scratches left by troubled creatures with practiced, unhurried hands. The second floor was given to magical bugs, the contagious coughs and fevers and afflictions that could sweep through a wizarding household the way a cold sweeps through a Muggle one, though here the remedies were brewed rather than swallowed from a chemist's shelf. The third floor held potion and plant poisoning, where healers met the aftermath of curious children who had nibbled something they should not have, or cooks who had misjudged a recipe, treating the burns and swellings of ingredients gone wrong. The fourth floor was devoted to spell damage, perhaps the most delicate of all the wards, where the healers worked to unpick hexes and curses that had settled too deeply into a person to simply vanish. And the fifth floor held artifact accidents, tending to those injured by cursed rings, temperamental cauldrons, or brooms that had thrown their riders with more enthusiasm than affection. The healers who moved through these halls wore lime green robes, and they carried themselves with the same unhurried confidence a herbology teacher might carry through a greenhouse full of temperamental plants, aware that some things could not be rushed, only tended. They mixed Skelgro to knit bones back together, slow and aching but sure, the kind of potion that regrew an entire arm overnight, though it left the limb tender and useless until morning. They administered blood-replenishing potion after injuries that had cost a patient too much of themselves, and pepper-up potion for the deep chills of winter fevers, which left a patient's ears trailing faint curls of steam for hours afterward, a small and almost comical mark of recovery. They dressed dragonpox with salves the color of moss, and they murmured counter-curses over patients who had been struck by jinxes flung in anger or carelessness. Trainee healers moved between the wards on quiet errands, carrying trays of potions the color of amber and rose, learning under the watch of senior colleagues who had spent decades memorizing the 1,000 small signs a body gives when something inside it has gone wrong. There was a settled rhythm to their work, not the frantic urgency one might imagine, but something closer to the patience of a gardener who understands that healing, like growing, cannot be hurried past its own pace. Downstairs, near the entrance, a welcome witch sat behind a low desk, directing new arrivals to the correct floor, with the calm authority of someone who had heard every strange complaint a witch or wizard could bring her. From a nose transfigured into a beak to a toe stuck permanently invisible after a mishandled charm. Further along, a gift shop sold get-well cards that hummed and twittered the moment they were touched, and small potted plants said to lift the spirits of the bedridden simply by being looked at. Even the corridors themselves seemed to hold a kind of hush, an understanding, as though the building had absorbed some of the patience its healers practiced daily. But not every hurt in that hospital could be mended, and it was on the 4th floor, among the cases of spell damage, that St. Mungo's held its most tender secret, a long corridor called the Janus Thicky Ward, named for a healer who had, long before, treated patients whose conditions could not be reversed, only accompanied. Here lived those touched by curses so old or so deeply cast that no counterspell, no potion, no patient hour of healing had yet found the way to undo them. Among these long-term residents were and capable aurors who had been so severely and cruelly tormented in the chaos following the first fall of Voldemort that their minds had slipped somewhere beyond the reach of any healer's hand, leaving them present in body but adrift, unable to fully recognize even their own son when he came to visit. We will not dwell on the cruelty that brought them there, only on the quiet fact of their care afterward, the soft blankets, the patient nurses, the small kindnesses of a hospital that had chosen not to look away from a hurt it could not cure. That, perhaps, is the truest philosophy of St. Mungo's, that healing does not always mean curing. For some curses, like being turned permanently furry or having one's bones vanished rather than merely broken and requiring the long regrowth of skelegrow, there was a clear path back to wholeness, if a slow and uncomfortable one. But for others, for a mind unraveled by torture or a body altered beyond reversing, the hospital offered something else entirely: dignity and steady attention. And a bed kept warm and a name kept spoken, for as many years as it took, or for always. Long-term patients were visited, were spoken to gently even when they could not answer, were kept clean and warm and safe. Because a place that only tended the curable was not, in the fullest sense, a hospital at all. Visiting hours brought a soft flood of ordinary tenderness into those halls. Families arrived with baskets of fruit and small gifts, and cards that, true to the whimsical spirit of that world, sang cheerful little tunes the moment they were opened, filling the wards for a moment with music before settling back into their quiet paper stillness. Healers stepped aside to let a mother sit beside her son's bed, or a husband hold his wife's hand through a long afternoon, understanding that presence itself was a kind of medicine, one that no potion could quite replace. There was warmth in this, the warmth of ordinary people, bringing ordinary comfort into a building built for extraordinary trouble, a reminder that even magic, for all its wonders, still depended on the plain human habit of showing up for one another. And so St. Mungo stood, hidden behind its tired shopfront, patient and lime green and endlessly busy, a place where broken bones were mended in days and broken minds were tended for lifetimes, where the incurable were never abandoned and the curable were never rushed. A place that understood, perhaps better than anywhere else in the wizarding world, that care itself was a form of magic, whether or not it ended in a cure. But healing is not only found in hospitals. Sometimes it is found in stone, in the low-breathing hum of a building that seems, on certain nights, to be almost alive, watching over its sleeping children the way a healer watches over a ward. To uncover how Hogwarts Castle itself became a character in this story, its staircases shifting with a will of their own, its room of requirement answering need before need is even spoken, its portraits murmuring and dozing in their frames, that story begins in Chapter 13, The Hogwarts Castle Alive. Somewhere behind that closed door, that story would rest until it was ready to be found again. And for now, the corridor beyond fell quiet, the torches burning low, the dust settling back over stone that had waited a very long time and could wait a little longer still. It is into that same hush that we step now, moving deeper into the castle itself, for the place that held so many of these small mysteries was never simply a building. It was Hogwarts Castle Alive, and this, Chapter 13, is the story of a structure that breathed, shifted, and seemed, in its own slow stone way, to care for those who lived inside it. Hogwarts was raised roughly 1,000 years ago, in an age when 4 young witches and wizards, each gifted beyond most of their peers, came together with a single shared dream. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin found one another drawn by a common wish to gather the magical children of the land and give them a place to learn in safety. They chose a remote spot in the Scottish Highlands, above a dark lake, ringed by mountains and forest, far enough from prying eyes that ordinary folk would never stumble upon what was being built there. Over years that blurred into decades, the 4 founders raised towers from raw stone, wove protective enchantments into every wall, and imagined into being a school unlike any other, one that would outlast them all. What made Hogwarts remarkable was not only its size or its beauty, though both were considerable, but the fact that its founders did not simply build it and leave it be. They poured such deep and layered magic into its foundations that the castle itself came to feel less like an object and more like a companion, aware in some diffuse, ancient way of the thousands of young feet that crossed its floors each year. Portraits spoke of it as though it had moods. Caretakers spoke of it as though it had preferences. And generations of students, half asleep in their beds at the end of a long day, would have sworn that the castle had shifted itself just slightly to make their walk home easier or harder, depending on how much mischief they had gotten up to that evening. Nowhere was this sense of a living building more obvious than in the staircases. Hogwarts held 142 staircases, and they were, by long tradition and by simple observation, not to be trusted to stay where a student had left them. Wide, sweeping staircases would detach slowly from one landing and swing, with a low grinding hush, toward another destination entirely, sometimes leaving a bewildered first year stranded on a step that now led nowhere useful at all. Some steps within these staircases held their own small secrets, a single stone tread that would vanish beneath an unwary foot and swallow a leg to the knee, unless the walker had learned, as older students eventually did, to leap that particular step out of habit. Prefects passed this knowledge down like folklore, part safety warning, part rite of passage, and new students spent their first weeks building a private, hard-won map of a castle that refused to hold still. Beyond the staircases lay corridors that led nowhere at all during certain months, and walls that opened onto rooms unlisted on any plan of the castle. Chief among them the Room of Requirement, known just as fondly to generations of students as the come-and-go room. It could be found on the 7th floor, directly across from a curious tapestry depicting Barnabas the Barmy in the unfortunate act of attempting to teach trolls ballet, an image that raised eyebrows in every generation but somehow never lost its charm. The Room of Requirement did not exist in any fixed shape. Instead, it responded to whoever walked past its blank stretch of wall 3 times while holding a clear need in mind, and when the door appeared, the room inside would have transformed itself into precisely what that need required. It might become a hidden training hall, a place to store 1,000 forgotten and forbidden objects across the centuries, or a small, quiet space meant only for weeping in private. Its very unpredictability made it one of the clearest signs of the castle's strange, attentive intelligence, as though Hogwarts itself understood loneliness, ambition, fear, and grief, and simply provided. The corridors that connected these places were lined, floor after floor, with portraits, and this too was part of what made the castle feel inhabited by more than just the living. Former headmasters and headmistresses, once painted, did not vanish from the story of the school. Their portraits allowed them to continue observing, and more than that, to travel between frames. Visiting portraits of themselves or of old friends hung in other parts of the castle, carrying news, offering counsel, occasionally squabbling as they had in life. The most famous of these hung in the headmaster's office itself, a gallery of painted predecessors who watched over each new headmaster's tenure, ready to offer their opinions whether asked or not. Among them, in later years, hung the portrait of Albus Dumbledore, whose painted likeness would go on to guide his successors through some of the school's most difficult hours, proof that at Hogwarts, wisdom did not simply end when a life did. The castle held other watchers too, less warm perhaps, but no less alive in their own fashion. Suits of armor lined certain corridors, capable of turning their helmeted heads to track a passing student, and on rare occasions known to break into surprisingly enthusiastic, tuneless singing during the holidays. Statues along the walls could be spoken to, and some, cleverly placed by long-departed founders or later headmasters, guarded secret passageways behind their stone forms, swinging open only for those who knew the correct word or gesture. Even the ceiling of the Great Hall carried its own quiet magic, enchanted so long ago that it simply mirrored the sky outside, be it starry, stormy, or streaked with the pale gold of a Highland sunrise, so that students eating breakfast always knew, without a single window in sight, exactly what kind of day waited for them outside the walls. And beneath all of this shifting, watching, singing architecture lay the 4 house common rooms, each a small world of its own, tucked into a different corner of the vast castle, as though the founders had wanted their students scattered like seeds across the whole structure. High in Gryffindor Tower, reached only by giving the correct password to the portrait of the fat lady in her pink silk gown, lay a round, warm room hung in scarlet and gold, a fire always crackling no matter the season. Down in the dungeons, close by the black waters of the lake itself, lay the Slytherin common room, cool and green lit, entered through a bare stretch of wall that opened only at the whispered password, the light from the lake rippling faintly through high windows as though the room sat just beneath the surface of the water. Hufflepuff's common room lay lower still, tucked near the kitchens in a burrow of a room, reached by tapping a particular rhythm on a stack of barrels, round and yellow and earthen, famously the easiest to enter, and, by every account, the hardest to feel unwelcome inside. And highest of all, at the very top of a spiraling tower, lay Ravenclaw's common room, which asked for no password at all, only an answer. For a bronze eagle knocker posed a riddle to every student who wished to enter. And those who could not puzzle it out were left waiting on the stairs until someone kinder came along to help. Taken together, the staircases that rearranged themselves by some schedule only the castle seemed to know. The room that became whatever a lonely or desperate heart most needed. The painted headmasters who kept counsel from their frames. The singing armor and watchful statues. And the 4 scattered, fiercely different common rooms. All pointed toward the same quiet truth that every student eventually came to accept without quite being able to explain it. Hogwarts did not merely house its students. It seemed, in some manner, too old and too deep to fully name. To know them, to watch over their small triumphs and their private sorrows, and to answer, in its own slow stone language, the shifting moods of everyone who walked its halls. But even a castle so vast and so alive had its limits, a line beyond which its warmth gave way to something wilder and far less forgiving. From the high windows of Gryffindor Tower and from the cold stone sills of the Slytherin dungeon alike, that boundary could be seen clearly enough on any evening. A dark, unbroken line of trees beginning where the last torchlight of the grounds faded into shadow. What lay beyond that tree line, and why the castle's protection seemed to stop so firmly at its edge, is the story we will uncover next, in Chapter 14, The Forbidden Forest and Its Secrets. South of the castle, beyond the last lit window and the last warm hallway, the land fell into shadow long before the sun truly set, for the trees there grew close enough to swallow the light whole. This was the Forbidden Forest, a name given not by the mapmakers of the ministry, but by generations of students who learned, sometimes the easy way and sometimes the hard way, that its edges marked the border between the world Hogwarts allowed and the world it merely tolerated. To stand at the tree line on an autumn evening was to feel the temperature of the air itself change, the ordinary chill of the grounds giving way to something older and less explainable, a stillness that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with age. The forest was ancient in a way that even the castle, with its shifting staircases and its centuries of portraits, could not quite match, for Hogwarts had been built within living memory of its founders, while the forest predated any wand ever carved in Britain. It stretched for miles beyond the boundary wall, folding into hills and hollows that no full map had ever quite captured, since the trees themselves seemed to resent being charted with the same precision as a corridor or a classroom. Students were told, from their very first evening in the Great Hall, that the forest was out of bounds to all pupils, and the phrasing was chosen with care, because forbidden implies a boundary that can be crossed, and every year a great many students found reasons, some noble and some merely foolish, to cross it anyway. What made the forest dangerous was never simply the creatures within it, though those creatures were plentiful and often extraordinary. It was the forest's own nature, its refusal to behave like ordinary woodland. Paths that seemed straightforward by daylight would double back on themselves by dusk. Clearings that had stood empty an hour before might, upon a second visit, reveal themselves to have never been empty at all, merely watching. Hagrid, who tended its edges and who understood its moods better than perhaps any human alive, spoke of the forest the way one might speak of a very large, very old relative, unpredictable, occasionally short-tempered, but fundamentally fair to those who approached it with respect. He was, for many years, the nearest thing the forest had to a diplomat, ferrying supplies and messages between the school and the creatures who lived just beyond its reach. and it was largely through his goodwill that an uneasy peace held between Hogwarts and its wild neighbor. That peace was not incidental. Long before the current castle stood, agreements had been struck, quietly and without much ceremony, between the earliest wizards of the region and the beings who already called the forest home. These were not treaties written on parchment and sealed with wax, for many of the forest's oldest inhabitants had little use for either, but understandings built instead on generations of careful behavior, of neither side pressing too far into the other's territory. Centaurs held the deepest parts of the forest as their own, moving through the trees with a dignity that made clear they considered themselves neither subjects of the wizarding world nor especially interested in its politics. They watched the stars from clearings kept private for exactly that purpose, tracking movements in the sky that they insisted held meaning far beyond what any divination textbook could offer. And they extended to Hogwarts a wary courtesy rather than friendship, aware that the school's borders and their own hunting grounds had, through long practice, learned to coexist. Deeper still, in pockets rarely visited even by those who knew the forest best, lived creatures whose presence was less a matter of record than of rumor passed carefully between gamekeepers and old professors. There were acromantula colonies tucked into hollows so deep that sunlight never quite reached the forest floor, though this chapter will not linger on the particulars of what lived there, since the creatures of the wider wizarding world have their own telling elsewhere. What matters here is simply the shape of the place, the sense that the forest operated on rules of its own devising, older than the school and largely indifferent to it. There were also parts of the forest that carried a gentler reputation, glades where unicorns were said to graze in the deepest hours of night, their presence marked only by a silver track of blood should one ever come to harm, since a unicorn's blood was known to shimmer faintly even against dark soil, a small and sorrowful beacon in an otherwise merciful woodland. Such creatures kept mostly to themselves and asked for nothing from the humans nearby except to be left in peace, and the forest, in its own quiet way, seemed to honor that request by keeping the glades well hidden from casual wandering. The forest's canopy grew so dense in places that daylight arrived, filtered and green, as though the sun itself had been asked to lower its voice before entering. Moss climbed the older trunks in soft, deep carpets, and fallen branches lay for years without decaying fully, held in a kind of magical suspension that many herbologists found endlessly fascinating and never quite managed to explain. Certain plants grew there, and nowhere else in Britain, their properties prized by potion makers willing to brave the tree line for a handful of rare roots, though most preferred to send someone else, or simply to wait for Hagrid to bring back a sample on one of his own expeditions. For all its danger, the forest was never framed by the school as purely hostile. Professors spoke of it with a certain rueful respect, the way one might speak of a colleague whose methods were unorthodox but whose results could not be argued with. It supplied ingredients, occasionally supplied lessons in humility to students who wandered too far past the tree line, and stood always as a reminder that magic, for all its structure and its wands and its neatly organized classes, still had wild corners it had never fully tamed. Even Albus Dumbledore, who understood the grounds of Hogwarts as well as anyone who had ever lived there, was known to speak of the forest with a certain deference, never pretending to command it, only to coexist with it. And it was that same deference, that same sense of a boundary respected rather than conquered, that made the forest such an enduring backdrop to so many quiet histories at Hogwarts. Individual moments of courage and curiosity folded into its shadows over the centuries, most of which were never written down at all. The forest kept its own records, in its own way, etched into bark and root and the long memory of the creatures who called it home. But even the wildest borders of the wizarding world eventually give way to its liveliest centers, and if the forest represented magic in its oldest, least governed form, there was a very different kind of magic, only a train ride away, bustling and bright and full of chatter, tucked behind a plain brick wall in the heart of London. That story begins in Chapter 15, Diagon Alley and the Wizarding High Street. Tucked behind that plain brick wall in the heart of London, past the ordinary red buses and the hurrying commuters who never once looked twice at the shabby little building wedged between a bookshop and a record store, stood the leaky cauldron. To Muggle eyes, it simply was not there at all, slipping from notice the way a forgotten word slips from the tongue. And only those who belonged to the wizarding world, or who walked beside someone who did, could see its dim windows and its crooked, hand-painted sign swinging above the door. This was the true threshold, the last ordinary doorway before an entirely different London opened up, and it is here that we begin Chapter 15, Diagon Alley and the Wizarding High Street. Inside, the leaky cauldron was dark and low-ceilinged and wonderfully worn, the kind of place that seemed to have absorbed 100 years of murmured conversation into its very timbers. Its publican in the 1990s was a stooped, toothless, and endlessly friendly wizard named Tom, who kept the fire burning and the butterbeer flowing for travelers passing through. Witches and wizards gathered at its small tables in cloaks and pointed hats, some pausing for a meal, some simply resting between errands, and the pub functioned as a kind of waiting room between two worlds, ordinary on one side of its front door and utterly magical on the other. It was often the first stop for young witches and wizards newly discovering their powers, and for 11-year-olds about to buy their very first wand, it was where the adventure properly began. Beyond the pub's back door lay a small, cramped courtyard, walled in brick on every side and seemingly leading nowhere at all. But those who knew the secret would draw their wand and count carefully among the bricks, tapping a precise sequence, traditionally 3 up and 2 across from a certain rubbish bin upon the rough surface of the wall. At that tap, the bricks would shiver, then fold and twist upon themselves, spiraling outward into a wide stone archway, and where solid wall had stood a moment before, there now opened a long, winding, cobbled street stretching away into the distance. This was Diagon Alley, and the sight of it never failed to take the breath away from anyone seeing it for the first time. A narrow lane of impossibly tall, leaning buildings in every color, shop fronts glittering with strange wares, and a low hum of chatter and magic hanging in the air like wood smoke. The cobblestones themselves seemed to hold centuries of foot traffic, worn smooth and faintly uneven, winding past shop windows piled with cauldrons of every size, telescopes that adjusted themselves, and stacks of parchment tied with ribbon. Rising above it all, pale and vast, stood the marble building already well known to us from earlier in this very story, Gringotts Wizarding Bank, its great bronze doors and goblin guards anchoring the entire street, both physically and in spirit. For it was here that most magical families kept their fortunes. And it was here that the alley's business, in every sense, truly began each morning. Wandering further down the street, one might pass Flourish and Blots, the wizarding world's most celebrated bookshop, its windows stacked high with towering piles of texts on every conceivable subject, from simple beginner's spellbooks to enormous tomes chained shut to stop them biting curious browsers. Each August, the shop grew especially crowded, packed with Hogwarts students clutching their book lists, parents squeezing down narrow aisles, and clerks climbing rolling ladders to reach volumes stored near the rafters. The smell of parchment and old leather bindings seemed to settle into the very walls, and for many students, the ritual of choosing that year's textbooks there was as much a mark of the changing season as the first cool evening of late summer. Not far along stood Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions, a shop draped in bolts of fabric in every shade of black, deep green, and midnight blue, where young witches and wizards stood patiently on small stools while pins hovered and hemlines rose and fell of their own accord, fitting each new student for their first set of school robes. Nearby, the apothecary offered a very different atmosphere entirely, dim and faintly pungent, its shelves crowded with jars of dried herbs, powdered horn, glimmering crystals, and ingredients whose origins were better left unexamined too closely, all destined for use in potion-making back at school. Elop's Owl Emporium sat close by too, its interior filled with soft hooting and rustling feathers, home to tawny owls and snowy owls and screech owls perched in long rows, many of which would soon find themselves carrying letters between school and home for years to come. For those with sport rather than study on their minds, Quality Quidditch Supplies displayed the newest broomsticks in its front window each year, polished handles gleaming under enchanted lighting, always drawing a small crowd of students pressing their noses to the glass and dreaming of the house team. And in later years, one of the liveliest and most colorful additions to the street was Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, a joke shop founded by the twins Fred and George Weasley, its exterior almost impossible to miss amid the otherwise traditional shop fronts, bursting with bright purple and orange displays, fireworks that never seemed to stop crackling in the window, and a constant stream of laughter spilling out onto the cobblestones. It became, in time, a kind of beacon of mischief and joy on a street that could sometimes feel serious and hurried, a reminder that magic was, at its heart, meant to be delighted in. Each August, in the weeks before the Hogwarts Express carried students north for the new term, Diagon Alley reached its fullest and most bustling self. Families streamed in through the archway from the leaky cauldron, checklists in hand, comparing cauldron sizes, testing quills, exchanging muggle money for small piles of gold galleons, silver sickles, and bronze nuts at Gringotts. There was a particular feeling to those late summer days, equal parts anticipation and mild exhaustion. The sense of an ending and a beginning both at once, as one school year closed and another waited just beyond the platform at King's Cross. It was, for many young witches and wizards, one of the happiest stretches of the whole calendar, a street humming with the promise of the term ahead. Yet Diagon Alley had another side to it, one far less welcoming and considerably harder to find on purpose. Branching off from the main street ran a narrow, shadowed passage known as Nocturne Alley, where the cheerful bustle faded almost instantly into something colder and more hushed. Its shopfronts sold a very different kind of merchandise, objects touched by darker magic, cursed artifacts, and ingredients of questionable and unsettling origin, all traded quietly among a clientele that preferred not to be recognized. Chief among its shops was Borgin and Burke's, its window crowded with shrunken heads, cursed necklaces, and cabinets of uncertain purpose, run by proprietors well practiced in discretion. Most families steered their children well clear of that turning, and the contrast between the two streets, one bright and welcoming, the other dim and secretive, said a great deal about the wizarding world as a whole, how close its warmest comforts always lived beside its oldest shadows. But Diagon Alley, for all its wonders, was only one gathering place among several in magical Britain, and beyond London there existed a village unlike any other, one where witches and wizards did not merely visit to shop, but actually lived, worked, and grew up entirely outside the sight of muggles altogether. In Chapter 16, Hogsmeade and the Villages of the Hidden World, we will uncover the only fully magical settlement in all of Britain, its snow-dusted rooftops, its warm and crowded inns, and the everyday magic that carried on quietly there long after the shop lights of Diagon Alley had dimmed for the night. Leave behind, for a while, the crowded lanes of Diagon Alley, with its jostling shoppers and its windows full of cauldrons and quills, and let your mind drift instead towards somewhere hushed, somewhere colder and cleaner, where snow settles thick on sloped rooftops and lantern light spills gold across a single winding street. This is Hogsmeade, and its story begins in Chapter 16, Hogsmeade and the Villages of the Hidden World. Picture, if you will, a village tucked among rolling hills in the north of Scotland, close enough to Hogwarts that on a clear night a student standing at a castle window might see its chimney smoke curling upward into the dark. Hogsmeade is small. Hogsmeade is old. And Hogsmeade is, in a way that no other settlement in Britain can claim, entirely magical. No non-magical residents live there at all. Every innkeeper, every shopkeeper, every soul that shuffles along its cobbled street on a frosty morning is a witch or a wizard. There are no ordinary neighbors peering curiously over garden fences, no delivery vans rumbling past. Nothing at all from the world beyond the hills except what magic itself has carried in. For students at Hogwarts, Hogsmeade holds a particular kind of magic of its own, the magic of anticipation. From the age of 13, once a student has entered third year, and with a permission slip signed by a parent or guardian, the castle opens its gates on certain weekends and lets its students walk down the long road into the village. For those younger, still confined to the grounds, Hogsmeade weekends become the subject of endless corridor conversation, a place spoken of with the same hushed excitement that surrounds any treasure not yet within reach. And when third year finally arrives, the village rewards that long wait completely. Follow that road down from the castle gates, past Hogwarts' boundary wall, and you find yourself walking into streets that seem to have been dusted with sugar even outside the winter months, though it is in the cold season that Hogsmeade truly comes into its own. Picture the eaves heavy with snow, the windows glowing amber against a purple evening sky, smoke rising in lazy ribbons from a dozen chimneys, and underfoot the soft crunch of boots on packed white ground. There is a particular hush that falls over a snow-covered village at dusk, and Hogsmeade wears that hush like a favorite cloak. At the heart of it all sits the Three Broomsticks, a warm and welcoming pub kept by a witch named Madame Rosmerta, whose establishment has for generations been the place where students and older wizarding folk alike gather to warm frozen fingers around tankards of butterbeer. Imagine the low murmur of conversation inside, the clink of glass, the curls of steam rising from mulled drinks, the fire crackling in a stone hearth while snow taps softly against the window panes outside. For many a Hogwarts student across the decades, that first sip of butterbeer inside the Three Broomsticks becomes a memory returned to again and again, warm and golden as the drink itself. A little further along the street waits Honeyduke's, a sweet shop so celebrated that its name alone is enough to make a young wizard's mouth water. Picture shelves rising floor to ceiling, packed with chocolate frogs that hop with a life of their own, sherbet lemons, ice mice that squeak faintly as they are nibbled, ever-expanding gum, ropes of licorice wands, 10,000 small colored jars, each holding some new sugared curiosity. The scent alone, thick and sweet and warm, is enough to draw students in from the cold, and many an afternoon in Hogsmeade has vanished happily inside those crowded, fragrant aisles. Not far from Honeyduke's stood Zonko's joke shop, a place devoted entirely to mischief, its shelves stacked with dung bombs, trick wands, fanged frisbees, and every manner of small chaos a young wizard might wish to unleash upon an unsuspecting corridor. For those with a taste for laughter and a little harmless trouble, Zonko's offered treasures every bit as prized as anything sold in honeydukes, only considerably louder and considerably smellier. And then, tucked away at the edge of the village, down a narrower and less inviting lane, sits the Hog's Head Inn, a rougher, quieter establishment than the Three Broomsticks. Its sign showing a severed boar's head, its atmosphere shadowed and low-lit. It was kept for many years by a wizard named Aberforth Dumbledore, brother to the great Albus Dumbledore, a man of few words and fewer pleasantries, who nonetheless kept his doors open to those who needed a quiet corner and did not ask too many questions. The Hog's Head was never the village's most cheerful room, but it held its own kind of comfort, the comfort of privacy, of being left alone with one's thoughts and one's drink. No account of Hogsmeade would be complete without mention of the old crooked building standing apart from the rest on the very edge of the village, boarded up and silent, its windows dark, its walls seeming to lean against the wind. This is the Shrieking Shack, long reputed to be the most haunted building in all of Britain. Villagers for years told of moans and shrieks and terrible clattering sounds echoing from within on certain nights, enough to earn the house its fearsome name and to keep even the boldest students from venturing too near its fence. Yet the truth of the Shrieking Shack, when it finally came to light, was tender rather than terrifying. The sounds that frightened a village for so long were never the cries of vengeful spirits at all, but the sounds of a young boy in pain, a boy named Remus Lupin, who as a student at Hogwarts carried within him the condition of lycanthropy. Once a month, beneath the full moon, he transformed, and to keep him safe, and to keep the village safe around him, a secret passage was built connecting the shack to the castle grounds, allowing him to endure his transformations alone, hidden away, cared for in secret by those who loved him. What the village had feared as a haunting was, in truth, the quiet suffering of one gentle boy, and the elaborate kindness woven around him to protect his secret. In later years, as darker days settled briefly over the wizarding world, Hogsmeade's low-lit corners took on a new purpose. The Hog's Head, dim and private as it had always been, became something of a meeting place, a quiet room where those working toward better days could gather unnoticed, share a fire and a few words, and feel, if only for an hour, that they were not alone in what they hoped to do. Even in its role during that resistance, the village kept its essential character, warm at its center, watchful at its edges, always ready to shelter its own. Mostly, though, Hogsmeade remained what it had always been, a cozy retreat from castle routine, a street of sweet smells and warm drinks and snow crunching underfoot, a place where friendships deepened over shared chocolate and laughter spilled out of doorways into the cold night air. It is easy, thinking of Hogsmeade, to feel that particular contentment of coming in from the cold into somewhere lit and welcoming, and it is that same feeling of belonging, of community drawn together, that carries us toward another gathering place entirely, one built not around a fire and a mug of butterbeer, but around a pitch, a set of hoops, and a small golden ball with wings of its own. In Chapter 17, Quidditch and the Magic of Sport, we will uncover how a game born from old broomstick traditions grew into the beating heart of wizarding community life. How the golden snitch first came to flutter above the pitch, and how the great teams of the wizarding world rose to bind whole communities together beneath one shared, soaring passion. And as that thread of story settled back into the dark, quiet like a candle drawn low, another kind of memory rose in its place, one full of open sky and rushing wind, of crowds on their feet and hearts pounding in unison. It is time to drift toward the pitch, toward the roar of 100 wings of leather and wood, toward the game that has stitched the wizarding world together for centuries. This is Chapter 17, Quidditch and the Magic of Sport. Long before stadiums and league tables, before commentators and championship cups, there was only a stretch of wild, boggy ground in the west of England known as Queerdick Marsh. It was there, historians tell us, sometime around the 1100s, that witches and wizards first began playing a rough, high-flying game on broomsticks, chasing a leather ball across the damp grass beneath a heavy sky. The details of those earliest matches are hazy, pieced together from fragments and old family accounts. But one text has preserved the story more faithfully than any other. Quidditch Through the Ages, written many generations later by the wizard historian Kenilworthy Wisp, gathered together the scattered legends of the sport's birth and its slow evolution, and to this day, it remains the most trusted account of how a marshland pastime grew into the beloved game played in every wizarding nation on Earth. Wisp traced how the rules solidified over the centuries, how the number of players settled at 7 aside, and how the rough tumble of early broom games slowly became something with structure, something with grace. At the heart of that structure are 4 positions, each with its own rhythm and its own kind of courage. The chasers move like a flock of swift birds, 3 to a team, weaving around each other in tight formation as they pass a red leather ball called the quaffle between them, searching for the gap that will let them send it through one of 3 hooped goals mounted high on poles at either end of the pitch. Each successful goal earns 10 points, and a skilled trio of chasers can turn a match with a few minutes of dazzling, coordinated flying. Guarding those 3 hoops is the keeper, who hovers and dives and stretches to block the quaffle, the last line of defense between the chasers and the scoreboard, often the calmest player on the pitch, even as the chaos swirls around them. Then there are the beaters, 2 on each team, armed with short, sturdy bats and tasked with a very particular kind of protection. Circling the pitch are 2 enchanted iron balls called bludgers, spelled long ago to fly at players and knock them from their brooms if given the chance. The beaters spend the match swatting these rogue balls away from their teammates and, when the opportunity allows, redirecting them toward the opposing team instead. It is physical, nervy work, and the best beaters develop a kind of sixth sense for where danger is about to come from. And high above it all flies the Seeker, the loneliest and most celebrated position in the game. The Seeker's task is simple to describe and fiendishly difficult to achieve: to spot and catch the golden snitch, a walnut-sized ball of gold with delicate silver wings that darts and hovers unpredictably across the pitch, nearly invisible against the sky. Catching the snitch ends the match and awards 150 points to the Seeker's team, a prize so large it usually decides the outcome of the game entirely. The snitch itself carries a history both charming and a little poignant. In the earliest days of the sport, the role now played by that enchanted golden ball belonged to a living creature, a small, fast, intelligent bird called the golden snidget. Early matches released a real snidget into play, and players would chase the frightened bird across the pitch, competing to catch it with their bare hands. It made for thrilling sport, but it came at a terrible cost. The golden snidget grew rarer and rarer as the game spread, hunted nearly to extinction by the enthusiasm of players and spectators alike. It took the intervention of wizarding conservationists and eventually protective laws to end the practice, and out of that concern for the bird's survival came an elegant solution. Magical craftsmen designed a small mechanical replica, spelled to mimic the snidget's darting, evasive flight, small enough to nearly vanish against the clouds. That invention became the golden snitch we know today, a quiet tribute to a bird whose safety mattered more than the thrill of the chase. Across the wizarding world, professional teams have built devoted followings over the centuries, their names woven into songs, scarves, and decades of hopeful conversation. The Chudley Cannons, based in England, are perhaps the most beloved underdogs in the sport's long history, a team whose glory days lie many, many decades in the past, and whose loyal supporters have weathered season after season of disappointment with a kind of stubborn, tender affection that says as much about wizarding culture as any victory could. Far more triumphant in recent memory is the Holyhead Harpies, a team based in Wales composed entirely of witches whose green and gold colors and fierce, skillful play have earned them a long and proud record of success, and whose very existence stands as a quiet reminder of how central witches have always been to the sport's history. Beyond the club level, Quidditch reaches its grandest stage in two towering international events. The Quidditch World Cup draws national teams and traveling supporters from every corner of the globe once every 4 years, filling vast temporary stadiums with tens of thousands of witches and wizards, their tents dotting the surrounding countryside, their voices rising together in anticipation. And the Triwizard Tournament, though not itself a Quidditch competition, shares that same spirit of international magical rivalry, drawing three great schools together in a contest of skill, courage, and friendship across borders. Both events, in their own way, remind the wizarding world how sport and shared spectacle can draw distant communities into a single, breathless crowd. Closer to home, within the stone walls of Hogwarts, Quidditch takes on a warmer, more intimate character. Each of the four houses, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw, fields its own team, and the matches between them fill the autumn and winter terms with anticipation, nerves, and fierce house pride. The winner of the most points across the season claims the House Cup honor for Quidditch, a trophy that has, over the years, meant as much to young players as any professional championship, cheered on by classmates bundled in scarves against the cold. In every wizarding community, from small village leagues to the grandest World Cup final, Quidditch performs the same quiet function that sport performs in any culture on Earth, Muggle or magical. It gives neighbors something to share, rivals something to respect, and generations something to pass down, story after story, season after season. And central to all of it is the broom itself, an object as much a part of wizarding identity as a wand. Across the centuries, certain brooms became legends in their own right. The sleek and powerful Nimbus series, prized for its speed and precision, and later the Firebolt, a broom of such extraordinary craftsmanship and grace that its arrival in a shop window could stop foot traffic on an entire street. But sport is only one thread in the vast tapestry of the wizarding world, and beyond the pitch-like creatures far stranger and older than any snitch, beings with their own laws, their own councils, their own long and delicate history of negotiation with wizardkind. In our next chapter, we will uncover the world of magical creatures of law and legend, the Ministry's careful classifications of beast and being, the proud and private societies of centaurs, the hidden kingdoms of merpeople beneath the water, and the long, uneasy diplomacy that has always existed between humans and the magical creatures who share their world. The roar of the crowd fades slowly from memory, the brooms settle into their racks, and the last echoes of sport drift off into the hush of a summer evening. There is a quieter world beneath all that spectacle, a world of treaties and classifications, of old agreements between wizards and the other beings who share their forests, lakes, and mountains. It is to that hushed diplomacy that we turn now. In Chapter 18, Magical Creatures of Law and Legend. Long before any Quidditch pitch was laid out or any stadium built, the Ministry of Magic had already set itself the enormous task of understanding and governing every strange and wonderful creature that shared the land with wizardkind. Deep within the ministry, tucked among departments devoted to transportation and games and sport, sits the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, a place of quills and parchment and endless filing, where clerks spend their days deciding how the wizarding world ought to relate to the non-human life around it. It is not a glamorous department. It does not draw crowds. And yet its decisions shape how every dragon, every merperson, every centaur, and every house elf is treated under wizarding law. At the heart of the department's work lies a system so old that most witches and wizards no longer think to question it, a scale known simply as the Ministry of Magic Classification for Creatures. Picture it as a row of 5 X marks, climbing from the mildest of beings to the most fearsome. A single X marks a creature considered utterly harmless, the sort found in any garden or hedgerow, needing no special caution at all. 2 X's suggest a creature that is safe under most circumstances, one a competent witch or wizard could handle without much worry. 3 X's raise the bar further still, a creature that a skilled and experienced magical handler could manage. 4 X's signal real danger, creatures requiring specialist knowledge and considerable caution, the kind of beast only a trained handler should approach. And at the very top of the scale sit the 5X creatures, known wizard killers, impossible to train or domesticate. Among them the great dragons that so recently thrilled us with their fire and their fury in the arena. It is a strange thought that the same beasts we watched soar and roar for sport are, in the quiet ledgers of the ministry, marked with the highest possible warning label in existence. But classification by danger is only half the story. Long ago, the framers of wizarding law drew a second and far more delicate distinction, one that still stirs debate in every corner of magical Britain. It is the line between what the law calls a being and what it calls a beast. A being, in the eyes of the ministry, is any creature judged to possess sufficient intelligence to understand the laws that govern magical society and to hold a rightful place within it. Wizards themselves are beings, of course, and so too are goblins. And so too, at least in principle, are centaurs. A beast, by contrast, is a creature without that legal standing, one that may be wonderfully clever or fiercely loyal, yet is not considered capable of grasping the framework of wizarding law well enough to be bound by it or protected by it in the same way. It is a distinction that sounds tidy on parchment and grows remarkably untidy the moment it meets the actual creatures it is meant to describe. Consider the centaurs who dwell in scattered herds across the forests of Britain, the forbidden forest among them, reading the movements of the planets with a patience that outlasts human generations. Under any reasonable measure of intelligence, language, and society, centaurs plainly qualify as beings. And yet, when offered that very classification by the ministry many years ago, the centaurs refused it, and they have gone on refusing it ever since. They see themselves as a proud and separate people, bound to their own laws and their own long, slow rhythms, not subordinate to wizarding society and not eager to be folded into its bureaucracy alongside creatures they do not consider their equals. Their refusal is not confusion or misunderstanding. It is a deliberate, dignified stand, an insistence that their world runs on its own axis, answerable to the stars they study rather than to the parchment and stamps of a ministry office. Wizards who wander into their forests uninvited soon learn how seriously that independence is guarded. Beneath the surface of the lakes and rivers lives another society entirely, one that few wizards ever glimpse in full. The Black Lake at Hogwarts holds within its cold, dark waters an entire settlement of merpeople. Their dwellings built from stone and coral, their halls decorated in a style utterly foreign to anything above the surface. They speak their own tongue, called Mermish, a language that sounds like screeching when heard through air, but becomes hauntingly musical underwater, where it belongs. They keep and their own laws, tribal and ancient, governing the merpeople's dealings with one another and with the rare wizard who ventures into their depths. Similar underwater civilizations are said to exist in lakes and seas across the world, each with its own customs, each easy for the wizarding world above to forget, simply because so few ever go looking beneath the waves. Merpeople, too, meet every reasonable test of being, and their treatment under wizarding law remains, like the centaurs, a subject of quiet, ongoing negotiation. And then there are the house elves, whose position is stranger still, bound by an old and powerful magic into servitude to wizarding families, intelligent and capable of deep loyalty and deep feeling, yet holding almost no legal protection of their own. Their story has touched our narration before, in glimpses, and it remains one of the wizarding world's most uncomfortable and unresolved chapters. A reminder that the tidy categories of being and beast rarely capture the full truth of any creature's inner life. What emerges from all of this, when we step back and look at the whole shape of it, is a magical Britain far more crowded and far more complicated than any single wizarding family or Hogwarts house could suggest. Centaurs who keep to their forests and answer to no ministry. Merpeople who sing their laws beneath still, dark water. Goblins who guard the wizarding world's gold according to customs of their own, older than most human memory. House elves bound by magic few fully understand. Dragons rated, at the very top of a danger scale, cheered on by thousands in an arena built for sport. Diplomacy among all these peoples has never been simple, and treaties struck centuries ago still shape uneasy truces today. Cooperation and tension woven together so tightly that it is often impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. And it is precisely in these unresolved tensions, these old agreements no one alive fully remembers negotiating, that we begin to sense something larger stirring beneath the surface of the wizarding world. Something that reaches back past treaties and classifications toward questions no one has ever fully answered. Where did magic itself first come from? Why do some phenomena defy every spell of detection or explanation devised by the cleverest witches and wizards? It is there, among the lingering gaps in even the oldest and most careful records, that we will uncover the puzzles waiting for us in Chapter 19, The Unsolved Mysteries of the Wizarding World. And so, the great catalogs close their covers, the classifications settle back onto their shelves, and the laws that had been so carefully traced through centuries of parchment fall quiet, at last. But not every corner of the wizarding world has been so neatly folded into a ledger. Beyond the tidy rows of statutes and taxonomies, there remain questions that have resisted every quill, every spell, every lifetime of devoted study, and it is to these tender, unresolved corners of magic that we now turn in Chapter 19, The Unsolved Mysteries of the Wizarding World. Let us begin where every wizard, witch, and curious mind eventually begins, with the question of magic itself. Where does it come from? Why does it settle into some children and not others, blooming in a household that has never known a wand in 1,000 years, while other families steeped in ancient magical blood for generations sometimes produce a child born entirely without it? Scholars at Hogwarts and beyond have offered theories for centuries. Some speak of inheritance passed so faintly through a bloodline that it surfaces unexpectedly, like a stream long buried beneath stone, finding its way again to the surface. Others suggest that magic is not inherited so much as it simply is, arriving the way starlight arrives, ancient and unclaimed by any single family tree. In the very first hours of this story, we acknowledged that this question had no settled answer, and centuries later, it still does not. And there is a strange comfort in that. Magic, it seems, does not wish to be fully explained. It arrives as a gift, unpredictable and untethered to logic, and perhaps that unpredictability is part of what makes it feel alive rather than mechanical. A force with its own quiet will rather than a formula waiting to be solved. Deep beneath the Ministry of Magic, in the hushed, windowless corridors of the Department of Mysteries, there is a chamber devoted entirely to one of magic's most delicate and unresolved questions, the nature of prophecy. The Hall of Prophecy stretches in long, dim rows, shelf after shelf lined with small, dusty glass orbs, each one glowing faintly with its own soft light, each one holding the recorded words of a seer who once glimpsed something beyond the ordinary reach of time. Only two people may ever approach a given orb and lift it safely from its shelf, the one who spoke the prophecy and the one about whom it was spoken. All others who dare touch an orb not meant for them find their mind assaulted by madness, as though the magic itself is protecting the fragile thread between fate and choice from careless hands. And what exactly are these prophecies? Are they fixed points in time, unbending and certain, destined to occur exactly as foretold no matter what anyone does? Or are they closer to seeds, planted in the world only to grow because someone, upon hearing them, chooses to act as though they must be true? The prophecy that shaped so much of recent wizarding history, the one spoken by Sybil Trelawney concerning a child born as the seventh month dies, has long troubled scholars precisely because of this uncertainty. It named no one directly. It became true only once it was acted upon. Once choices were made in response to words that might otherwise have gathered dust on a forgotten shelf. The unspeakables who study this hall have never resolved whether prophecy compels the future or merely describes one possible path through it. And there is something almost soothing in that ambiguity, the sense that the future is not a locked door, but a conversation still being had. Just as tender, just as resistant to full understanding, is the nature of love as a magical force. Albus Dumbledore spoke of it many times across his long life, always with a kind of reverent wonder, calling it the deepest and most mysterious of all the branches of magic, more mysterious even than death, more mysterious than the darkest curses ever devised. It cannot be bottled, brewed, or captured in a wand movement, and yet its effects ripple through wizarding history more powerfully than almost any spell recorded. When Lily Potter stood before her infant son on that October night in Godric's Hollow and refused to step aside, the protection she wove was not incantation or wand work in the traditional sense, but something older, something born purely from the willingness to give her life for his. That sacrifice left a ward within Harry's very skin, a magic so that even Lord Voldemort, for all his study of the darkest arts, could not touch him without unbearable pain. Healers, scholars, and unspeakables alike have spent decades attempting to chart exactly how such protective magic forms, what conditions allow it to take root, why some acts of love produce this shimmering, lasting ward while others do not. No wand was ever waved to create it. No spellbook records its formula. It simply is, ancient and quietly powerful, existing in the space where formal magical theory runs out of words. And then there is the Death Room, tucked away in the same hushed department, circular and cold, with tiered stone benches surrounding a dais at its center. Upon that dais, stands a stone archway, weathered by time beyond any ministry record, and hanging within its frame, a veil, tattered and black, stirring faintly, though no wind ever enters that chamber. Those who have stood near it speak of hearing whispers drifting from beyond the fabric, faint voices that seem to call out just beyond the edge of understanding. No one who has passed fully through that veil has ever returned to describe what waits on its other side. The unspeakables who study it have measured it, observed it, spent entire careers seated on those stone benches simply watching it ripple. And after all that devoted attention, they remain no closer to naming what it truly is. A doorway, a boundary between what we call life and whatever follows. A mirror for grief itself. It has never confirmed a single theory beyond doubt, and it hums on in that quiet chamber precisely as it always has, patient and unexplained. Perhaps what unites all of these mysteries, the true nature of magical inheritance, the fixed or fluid rules of prophecy, the immeasurable depth of love as protection, the silent riddle of the veil, is the humility of those who study them. The unspeakables spend entire lifetimes in that department without ever fully mastering their chosen subject. And rather than treating this as failure, many of them come to regard it as something closer to a privilege, the chance to sit quietly beside a mystery larger than any one witch or wizard and simply pay attention to it. There is no shame recorded in their notes, no despair, only patient wonder passed down from one generation of researchers to the next, each adding a small observation, a careful footnote, a fragment of understanding, while leaving the deeper truth exactly where it has always rested, just beyond reach. It is a strange kind of comfort to know that even after so many centuries of spellcraft and study, the wizarding world still holds secrets it has never fully solved. Rather than fraying the fabric of that world, these mysteries seem to be woven directly into it, threads of wonder running alongside every known law and classification, reminding us that magic was never meant to be fully tamed. And it is in following those very threads, the objects, the places, the institutions, the love and the loss that have shaped this world across so many centuries, that we begin to see how it all gathers into something larger and more lasting than any single mystery alone. That gentle gathering, the quiet weaving of everything we have uncovered together into one lasting tapestry, is where we turn next, in Chapter 20, The Legacy of the Wizarding World. That thread, left hanging in the hush of what came before, now settles into something wider, something that has been waiting patiently in the dark to be gathered up whole. It is time, at last, to draw every strand together, to sit back and let the whole tapestry of this world unfold before us one final time. In Chapter 20, The Legacy of the Wizarding World. Think back, if you can, to where this all began, with the simple idea of magic itself, that quiet force humming beneath the surface of things, channeled through a wand of holly or vine or elderwood, each one chosen as much as choosing, each one a faint echo of the witch or wizard who carried it. Wandlore taught us that magic was never a tool to be seized carelessly, but a partnership, a kind of trust extended between a person and the living wood and core that answered them. Ollivander spent his life believing this, and in the end, it was one of the truest lessons the wizarding world had to offer, that power freely given asks something of us in return. From there, the mind can wander to the great and storied objects that passed through this world like heirlooms of legend. The Deathly Hallows, the wand, the stone, and the cloak, each one tempting, each one dangerous in the hands of those who wanted them for the wrong reasons, and each one, ultimately, a lesson about what it means to accept mortality rather than conquer it. The Mirror of Erised, standing tall and silent in its abandoned corridor, showing not truth but longing, teaching that the deepest wants of the heart can either guide us or hold us captive if we linger too long in front of them. The Marauder's map, drawn by 4 young friends who wished only to wander their school freely. Its ink lines a quiet monument to friendship long after those friendships met their own separate fates. And the time turner, spinning hours backward, reminding us that even magic has its limits, that some doors, once closed, are better left closed, and that patience is its own kind of wisdom. Beyond the objects stood the great institutions that held this hidden world together, each one imperfect in its own human, or rather wizarding way. The Ministry of Magic, with its marble atrium and its fountains and its long corridors of ambition, tried across the decades to balance order against fear, and did not always succeed. Yet it endured. Gringotts, carved deep into stone and guarded by goblins who trusted no one easily, kept the treasures and the secrets of centuries safe beneath London, its very existence a reminder that trust between different kinds of beings is always a negotiation, never a given. Azkaban, cold and joyless, showed the cost of a justice system that forgot mercy, its walls holding both the guilty and, sometimes, the wrongly accused, a shadow across the wizarding world's conscience. And St. Mungo's, warm by comparison, its healers working long into the night, stood as proof that even in a world of spells, care and patience remained the true medicine. And then, of course, there was the castle. Hogwarts itself, rising out of the mist over the Scottish Highlands, its towers catching the first light of morning and its windows glowing gold in the evening, sheltering generation after generation of students who arrived afraid and left transformed. Its moving staircases, its portraits that gossiped and dozed, its 4 houses each teaching a different kind of courage, all of it built not merely from stone, but from centuries of hope invested in the young. And just beyond its walls, the forbidden forest, dark and tangled and alive with creatures both wondrous and fearsome, a reminder that magic was never meant to be entirely tamed, that some corners of the world would always remain wild, mysterious, and worth respecting rather than conquering. Further out still, beyond the castle grounds, lay the villages and high streets where ordinary wizarding life unfolded in all its color and clutter. Diagon Alley, crooked and crowded, its shop windows filled with cauldrons and broomsticks and second-hand spellbooks, alive every August with nervous new students buying their first wands. Hogsmeade, the only entirely magical village in Britain, its chimneys puffing smoke into cold air, its sweet shop windows fogged with warmth, a place where students could feel, just for an afternoon, like ordinary young people wandering an ordinary town. These streets were where the grand and the everyday met, where legend and grocery shopping shared the same cobblestones. And woven through all of it was the culture that made this world feel lived in rather than merely magical. Quidditch, played on broomsticks high above roaring crowds, gave the wizarding world its shared heartbeat, its rivalries and its unlikely heroes, its Sunday afternoons spent shouting into the wind. The many creatures who shared this world, some gentle, some fierce, all deserving of understanding, taught that magic was never only about human beings, that centaurs and merpeople and house elves and dragons each carried their own wisdom, their own claims to dignity, and that diplomacy between different kinds of minds was some of the hardest and most necessary magic of all. And beneath everything, still, quietly, the mysteries that were never fully solved. The questions left open on purpose, perhaps, so that wonder would never run dry. Some stories in this world folded neatly to a close, while others simply faded into fog at the edges, and that, too, felt right. because no world worth loving ever explains itself completely. So here, at the end of this long telling, we can finally step back and see it whole. This tapestry of magic and history and wonder. Every thread touching every other thread. Wandlore beside heartbreak, ancient objects beside ordinary shops, grand institutions beside a warm cup of butterbeer on a cold afternoon. None of it stood alone. The castle needed the village needed the streets of London, the streets needed the quiet forest at the edge of everything, and all of it needed the people and the creatures who walked through it, who loved it, who protected it, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with great sacrifice, but always with feeling. And perhaps that is the truest thing this whole story ever whispered to us, night after night, chapter after chapter. That magic, in the end, was never really about the spells themselves, or the wands, or the ancient artifacts passed hand to hand through centuries. It was about the connections formed along the way, the courage summoned in small, unnoticed moments, the care extended to a frightened first year, a wounded creature, a grieving friend. It was about showing up for one another when it would have been easier not to. That is the part of the story that does not end when the last page turns, because it lives on in every act of kindness modeled after it, in every reader who closes their eyes tonight, still holding a little of that castle light within them. So let the towers fade into mist now. Let the staircases settle and stop their turning. Let the last candle in the great hall dim to a single warm ember. The story has been told, all of it, gathered up gently and set down with care, like a well-loved book closed softly for the night. Somewhere, the castle is still standing, still humming faintly with old magic, still waiting quietly for anyone who might need it again. And here, in this hush, with the whole tapestry finally laid out and folded, there is nothing left to do now but rest, and let the last of these words carry you slowly, softly, all the way down into sleep. We have traveled a long way together tonight. We began with what magic truly is, the living current beneath every spell. We stood in the dust of Ollivanders while a wand chose its wizard. We reached back into wandless casting and the ancient magics that came before any ministry. We followed three brothers down a lonely road and weighed the hollows they carried home. We looked into the Mirror of Erised and saw the shape of desire. We traced hidden footsteps across the Marauder's map and learned how secrets are kept and revealed. We turned an hourglass and felt time fold. We leaned over simmering cauldrons, brewing luck and transformation. We rode the deep carts of Gringotts through the halls of the goblin nation. We walked the long corridors of the ministry, crossed grey water to Azkaban, and found healing again in the wards of St. Mungo's. We listened to Hogwarts itself breathe, its staircases turning, its rooms appearing when needed most. We entered the forbidden forest under its old pacts and left it in peace. We browsed the bright windows of Diagon Alley, wandered the lanes of Hogsmeade, chased the golden snitch across a roaring sky, and sat in council with centaurs and merpeople. We held the unsolved mysteries in open hands, and at the end we saw the whole tapestry, one living, woven world. From the first spark of magic to its deepest mysteries, this world has been here all along, patient and glowing. And it will still be here tomorrow, waiting quietly for you to return. Good night. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.